Part 1. The fire crackled as we sat in a circle, the orange glow illuminating our faces against the backdrop of Montana wilderness. 5 strangers brought together by a mutual friend's camping trip, each with stories to tell. "So we're really doing this? Scary stories around the campfire?" laughed Marcus, a tall guy from Seattle with a nervous smile. "Isn't that a bit cliché?" "Best traditions always are," replied Eliza, tossing another log onto the fire. Sparks flew upward into the night sky, merging with the stars. "Besides, I've been waiting all day to freak you all out." "Just remember the rules," said Connor, our host for the weekend. "No made-up bullshit, only real stories. Things that actually happen to you or someone you know. And no ghosts or monsters," added Sasha, wrapping her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. "Real horror is what humans do to each other." I took a swig from my beer and nodded. "I'll start then." All eyes turned to me. The fire popped. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. This happened to me about 3 years ago, when I was living in an apartment complex in downtown Portland. I just moved in, didn't know any of my neighbors yet. It was a security building, but not particularly high-end, just a regular 6-story place with about 40 units. First week was normal. I was unpacking, getting settled, the usual stuff. Then I started noticing small things that felt off. Items in my apartment seemed to be in slightly different positions than where I'd left them. At first, I thought I was just being forgetful because of the move. One morning I woke up and found my laptop open on the kitchen table. I was sure I'd closed it and left it on the couch the night before. Another day, a glass of water appeared on my nightstand. One I didn't remember pouring. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe you were sleepwalking." That's what I thought too, so I set up my phone to record while I slept. The recordings showed nothing, just me sleeping normally. But the weird displacements kept happening. Then I noticed something else. My food was disappearing faster than I was eating it. Not entire meals, just small amounts, like someone had taken a few bites of my leftovers or drunk some of my orange juice. That's when I started getting really paranoid. I checked all the windows and doors, made sure everything was locked tight. I even put a chair against my front door at night. About 2 weeks after moving in, I came home from work to find something that chilled me to the bone. My shower was wet. Not just a little damp, but with water droplets still sliding down the tiles. Someone had used it recently while I was at work. Sasha leaned forward. "Did you call the police?" I thought about it, but what would I say? "Officer, someone might be stealing bites of my food and using my shower." I had no proof, no signs of forced entry. I figured they'd think I was crazy. Instead, I decided to set a trap. I bought a small security camera, one of those nanny cams disguised as a clock, and set it up facing my front door. I also put small, almost invisible marks on my door and windows with clear nail polish. If anyone opened them, the dried polish would crack. After 3 days of nothing unusual on the camera, I was starting to think maybe I really was going crazy. Then, on the 4th day, while reviewing the footage, I saw it. I paused, taking another sip of beer. At 1:17 p.m., while I was at work, my front door opened and someone walked in. A man I'd never seen before, using a key. He moved with complete confidence, like he belonged there. "Oh my God," Eliza whispered. He went straight to my refrigerator, took out some leftovers and ate a few bites standing right there. Then he walked around my apartment, touching things, my books, my clothes. He used my bathroom. And then, this is the part that still makes my skin crawl. He lay down on my bed just for about 10 minutes before getting up, straightening everything and leaving. "Did you recognize him?" Connor asked. "No. But when I checked the building's directory in the lobby, I found him. He was the maintenance manager, the guy who had spare keys to every apartment in the building." "Jesus," Marcus muttered. "What did you do?" I took the footage to the building management company. They were horrified, fired him immediately, and changed all my locks. The police got involved too. Turns out I wasn't the first tenant he'd done this to. He'd been entering random apartments for months, maybe years. They searched his own apartment and found souvenirs. Small items taken from tenants. A hairbrush here, a photo there. Nothing valuable, just personal things. And a journal where he'd written detailed observations about the tenants' lives, what they ate, when they showered, what they watched on TV. The truly disturbing part was learning he'd been in my apartment at least 12 times in those 3 weeks. Sometimes while I was at work, sometimes while I was sleeping. The police told me he would sometimes just stand in tenants' bedrooms, watching them sleep for hours. Silence fell over our circle as everyone absorbed this. They arrested him, of course, I continued. He's serving time now, but I still check my apartment thoroughly every time I come home. I still put a chair against my door at night. And I never, ever feel completely alone in my own space anymore. Did he ever hurt anyone? Sasha asked hesitantly. Physically? No. But knowing someone violated your personal space like that, watched you in your most vulnerable moments, it's a different kind of harm. One that stays with you. Connor tossed another log on the fire, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. The invasion of privacy is almost worse than physical harm sometimes, he said thoughtfully. It's like he was consuming pieces of your life without your knowledge. Exactly. I nodded. The detective who handled the case told me something I'll never forget. She said most people picture home invaders as burglars who break in, take stuff, and leave. But there's another type that's much more disturbing. The ones who just want to be in your space, to insert themselves into your life without you knowing. They don't want your things. They want the feeling of control, of knowing you intimately while remaining a stranger to you. Marcus shuddered visibly. Well, I'm definitely checking my apartment for hidden creeps when I get home. You should, I said. Because the scariest part? The building manager told me this guy had been working there for 7 years. 7 years of access to people's private spaces, their lives. And no one ever suspected a thing until I caught him on camera. I moved out the next day, by the way. Couldn't stay there knowing what had happened. But sometimes, even in my new place, I wake up at night feeling watched. And I wonder how many other maintenance men, landlords, or previous tenants might have keys they shouldn't have. Eliza hugged herself. Well, thanks for that. I'm never going to feel comfortable in a rental again. Sorry, I laughed, though there wasn't much humor in it. But you did ask for real horror stories. True, she conceded. And human creepiness is definitely worse than any ghost story. Who's next? I asked, looking around the circle. Sasha raised her hand. I've got one. Happened when I was working as a night nurse at Chicago Memorial Hospital. As Sasha began her tale, I gazed into the dancing flames, the heat on my face a welcome contrast to the chill that always came with retelling my story. Some violations you never fully shake off. Like the knowledge that while you're going about your day, someone could be in your most private space, touching your things, watching you without your awareness. A stranger collecting pieces of your life like souvenirs. And the most disturbing thought of all, how many people might be experiencing the same violation right now without having any idea it's happening? Part 2. The fire hissed as a light rain began to fall, but our small overhang kept us dry. We huddled closer, steam rising from our clothes as the heat battled the encroaching chill. So, like I was saying, Sasha continued, tightening her cardigan again, this happened about 4 years ago when I was working night shifts as a nurse at Chicago Memorial. I was still pretty new, only about 8 months into the job, and they had me stationed on the 4th floor, mostly post-surgical recovery patients. She took a sip from her thermos, which I suspected contained something stronger than coffee. Anyone who's worked hospital night shifts knows they have a completely different vibe than days. It's quieter, darker despite the fluorescent lights, and the normal hospital sounds, beeping machines, squeaking gurneys, intercoms, they all seem amplified somehow. I can imagine, Eliza nodded. I'd get spooked for sure. Most nights were uneventful. Check vitals, distribute medications, update charts. But this particular night heat was a Tuesday in January, bitter cold with the snowstorm things felt off from the moment I arrived. First, we were understaffed. 2 nurses had called out sick, so I was covering twice as many rooms as usual. One of my patients was an older man recovering from gallbladder surgery. Nice guy, very polite, but that night he seemed agitated. When I went to check on him, he grabbed my wrist and started telling me that someone kept coming into his room. A woman, he said. She doesn't do anything, just stands at the foot of my bed and watches me. I assumed it was the pain meds causing hallucinations and made a note to have the doctor review his medication in the morning. I told him I'd check with the other staff, but assured him no one was entering his room unauthorized. Around 2 a.m., I was at the nurse's station updating charts when I heard a code blue announced for a room down the hall. I rushed over with the crash team, but the placenta middle-aged woman who'd seemed stable earlier was already gone. The doctor called time of death at 2:17 a.m. That's when things started getting weird. As we were covering the woman's body, I heard a commotion from down the hall. It was my gallbladder patient, practically screaming. When I got to his room, he was trying to get out of bed, pulling at his IV. "That's her," he kept saying. "The woman who's been watching me is the doctor who just came in here." I tried to calm him down, telling him no doctor had been in his room, I'd been at the nurse's station, and would have seen anyone enter. But he was insistent, describing a woman in a white coat with dark hair who had come into his room just minutes before. As I was settling him back in bed, a chill ran through me when I realized he was describing the patient who had just died down the hall. There was no way he could have known what she looked. Like she'd been admitted after he was already in recovery, and their rooms were too far apart for him to have seen her being brought in. I convinced myself it was just a weird coincidence. Maybe he'd glimpsed her during transport to his room, or maybe he'd overheard staff talking about her. Anything seemed more plausible than, well, the alternative. The rest of the night was quiet. Too quiet, really. The snowstorm had picked up, and we couldn't even hear the usual city noises outside. Around 4 a.m., I was doing another round of vitals when I noticed something strange in the hallway. The lights at the far end were flickering, which wasn't unusual for our aging hospital, but beneath them was what looked like a puddle on the floor. I followed the wet trail to find the source, thinking a pipe had burst or something. It led to the staff shower room we had for overnight workers. The door was slightly ajar with the light off. Now, hospital protocol said I should never enter a dark room alone, but I figured someone had just left the shower running. I pushed the door open and reached for the light switch. Sasha paused, looking each of us in the eye. All 3 shower stalls were running full blast, hot water creating a steam-filled room, but no one was there. Just an empty room with running showers and a set of wet footprints leading out the door the same trail I'd followed in. I turned off all the showers and immediately went to find the security guard stationed at our floor's entrance. Asked if anyone had been using the shower room or if he'd seen anyone walking around. He hadn't, and the floor's entry log showed nobody had come or gone in hours except for the staff responding to the code blue. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "So, who turned on the showers?" "That's what I wanted to know," Sasha continued. I mentioned it to the charge nurse who'd been working there for decades. Instead of being surprised, she got this strange look on her face and asked me if I knew about Dr. Patterson. Apparently 5 years earlier, a surgical resident named Dr. Patterson had been found dead in that shower room. She'd been working a 30-hour shift during a similar January snowstorm and had gone to take a shower during a break. When she didn't return to her station, they went looking and found her unconscious. Heart attack? They said rare for someone in their early 30s, but not unheard of. She was pronounced dead right there in the shower room. I thought that was the end of the story. Just the charge nurse trying to spook the new girl with hospital ghost stories. But then she told me something that made my blood run cold. Dr. Patterson had been the attending physician for a patient who suffered severe complications after a routine gallbladder surgery performed by the same surgeon who had operated on my agitated patient. At this point, I was thoroughly creeped out, but still convincing myself there were rational explanations for everything. I went back to check on my gallbladder patient, hoping he'd settled down. When I entered his room, he was sitting up in bed, staring at his door with wide eyes. "She was just here again," he whispered. "Soaking wet, standing right at the foot of my bed." I checked his chart hadn't received any medication that would cause hallucinations in the last 6 hours. I tried to reassure him, told him I'd stay with him for a while. While sitting with him, I casually asked if he knew anything about his surgeon's history. He said something odd. He doesn't like to talk about the mistakes, but she knows. The wet doctor knows what he did to her patient. I felt a chill run down my spine. There was no way this man could know about Dr. Patterson's patient from 5 years ago. I asked him what he meant, and he looked at me like I was stupid. The surgeon made a mistake with me too, he said. I heard him talking to another doctor when they thought I was still under anesthesia. Something about nicking an artery, having to repair it quickly. They never mentioned it to me afterward. Now I was genuinely alarmed. If the surgeon had made a mistake during his operation and covered it up, that was serious. But before I could ask more questions, my patient's heart monitor started going haywire. He was in cardiac arrest. We called another code blue, started CPR, but he didn't make it. Time of death, 4:47 a.m. During the commotion, I didn't notice that the security guard had gone completely pale. After we'd covered the body and the doctor had gone, he pulled me aside. "I need to tell you something," he said. "When I was watching the security monitors earlier, after you asked about the shower room, I rewound the footage to check if anyone had gone in there. The camera outside the shower room showed no one entering, but for about 3 minutes, around the time the showers must have been turned on, the footage went staticky, then just showed an empty hallway. That's when I started connecting dots. I didn't want to connect. The surgeon who operated on my patient was the same one whose mistake allegedly led to the death of Dr. Patterson's patient 5 years earlier. My patient somehow knew details about a mistake during his own surgery that he couldn't possibly have overheard, and now he was dead too. I pulled his medical records and reviewed them more carefully. There it was a note about a minor complication during surgery that required additional repair, extending the operation by 40 minutes. Nothing about an arterial nick, but the timing matched what my patient had described. Sasha stopped, taking a long sip from her thermos. The next day, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I accessed the hospital's archived records and looked up Dr. Patterson's patient from 5 years ago. The surgical notes were sparse, but mentioned a procedural complication with similar language to what was in my patient's chart. I took my concerns to the head of nursing, suggesting that the surgeon might be covering up serious mistakes. She listened carefully, then asked me to follow her to her office. Once there, with the door closed, she told me the surgeon had been under review for months. 3 of his patients had experienced unexplained complications that year alone. 2 weeks later, that surgeon was quietly let go from the hospital. No public statement, no explanation to the staff. He simply didn't appear on the schedule anymore. I transferred to the pediatric ward after that. Never worked that floor again. But I've always wondered about those running showers, and how my patient knew about Dr. Patterson when there was no way he could have. "Do you think?" Marcus began, then seemed to think better of it. "I think hospitals are places where the lines between life and death get blurry," Sasha said carefully. "Not in a supernatural way, but in the minds of people who are vulnerable, medicated, and surrounded by the clinical reality of mortality. As for the surgeon I think guilty, people sometimes see accusers where there are none. Maybe he glimpsed a dark-haired woman in a white coat and his conscience filled in the rest. Maybe he turned on those showers himself during some kind of dissociative episode. The rational explanations are often more disturbing than the supernatural ones if you think about it. I'd rather believe in a vengeful ghost than a surgeon who keeps making life-threatening mistakes and covering them up." "Did they ever find evidence that he was deliberately harmful?" I asked. "No. Just negligent, possibly impaired. There were rumors he had a drinking problem. And in a high-stress environment like surgery, even small impairments can have fatal consequences." The rain picked up, drumming on the tarp above us. For a moment, there was no sound but the crackling fire and falling water. "The truly scary part," Sasha concluded, "is that we put our lives in strangers' hands every day without knowing their secrets, their mistakes, their demons. Every time you're unconscious on an operating table, your life depends entirely on the competence and honesty of people you've barely met." "Well," Connor said after a prolonged silence, "I'm officially never getting surgery." We laughed, breaking the tension. but I noticed Eliza staring into the darkness beyond our campsite. "What about you, Eliza?" I asked. "You said you had a story that would freak us out." She turned back to the fire, her expression unreadable in the flickering light. "Mine's different. It's about a vacation rental not unlike the cabin where we're staying tomorrow night." Marcus groaned. "Are you trying to make sure none of us sleeps for the rest of this trip?" "That's exactly my plan," Eliza smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It happened last summer, when I rented what was supposed to be my dream vacation home." Part 3. Eliza leaned forward, the firelight casting dramatic shadows across her face. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and began her story. "So last summer, I'd been working non-stop on this massive advertising campaign. 60-hour weeks for 3 months straight. When it finally wrapped, I was completely burned out and desperate for some alone time. No people, no phones, no deadlines, just me, some books, and nature. I found this gorgeous cabin on one of those vacation rental sites. It was in the Adirondacks, about 4 hours from my apartment in Boston. The photos looked amazing rustic but modern interior, wraparound porch, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a private lake. Best part? It was isolated. The listing said nearest neighbor 2 miles away, like it was a selling point, which for me, it absolutely was. The reviews were all 5 stars, people raving about the peace and quiet, the beautiful surroundings, how well equipped the place was. The owner had great ratings, too responsive, professional, considerate. Connor nodded appreciatively. "Sounds perfect, actually." "That's what I thought," Eliza replied, her voice tinged with irony. "I booked it for 10 days in July." The drive up was gorgeous winding mountain roads, dense forests, barely any traffic. The property itself was at the end of a long private road. When I first saw the cabin, it looked exactly like the photos. 2 stories, natural wood exterior, that amazing porch. I remember thinking I'd scored the perfect getaway. The owner had left the key in a lockbox with a code. Inside, everything was just as beautiful as advertised open floor plan. Modern kitchen, comfortable furniture. The place had this curated collection of art and artifacts, tribal masks, unusual sculptures, and framed butterflies, the kind of stuff that screams, "I have money and I travel." I unpacked, opened some wine, and settled in for my first night of relaxation. Everything was perfect. The next morning, I woke up refreshed, made coffee, and took it out to the porch to watch the sunrise over the lake. That's when I noticed the footprints. "Footprints?" Marcus echoed. "Yes, in the dewy grass leading from the edge of the woods right up to the porch where I was sitting. They weren't there when I arrived the previous afternoon. My first thought was that maybe the owner had come by to check on something and didn't want to disturb me. Weird, but not alarming yet. I sent him a quick message through the rental app asking if he'd stopped by, and he replied pretty quickly saying no, he hadn't been to the property in weeks. That's when I started to get uneasy. I was miles from the nearest neighbor, at the end of a private road that no one would accidentally wander down. I walked around the cabin, checking for more footprints or any signs of disturbance. Nothing seemed out of place. No forced entry. Nothing missing. I tried to shake it off, told myself it was probably just a hiker who got lost and was looking for directions, then thought better of bothering someone so late. Or maybe deer tracks that just looked human in the dewy grass. I decided to put it out of my mind and enjoy my day. I spent the morning reading on the porch, went for a swim in the afternoon, then hiked a bit on the trails around the property. It was a perfect, relaxing day. That evening, I made dinner, opened another bottle of wine, and settled in to watch the sunset from the living room with those giant windows overlooking the lake. As the light faded, I became acutely aware of how exposed I felt. Those beautiful windows that had been such a selling point now felt like giant fishbowl walls, letting anyone outside see everything I was doing, while I could see nothing beyond my own reflection once it got dark. I got up to close the curtains, and that's when I saw it. Just for a second, illuminated by the security light that had clicked on by the side of the house, a figure, standing at the edge of the woods. The same place where the footprints had led from that morning. Sasha leaned forward. "Could you see who it was?" "No, just a silhouette. Tall, standing perfectly still, watching the house." When the security light went off after a minute, the figure disappeared into the darkness. I'm not ashamed to say I completely freaked out. I closed all the curtains, checked all the doors and windows twice, and even moved a heavy dresser in front of the back door. I was kicking myself for thinking that total isolation was a good idea. I tried calling the local police, but the cell service was spotty at best. I got through, but lost the connection before I could explain the situation. I barely slept that night. Every creak and groan of the cabin and old buildings like that make plenty of noises at night had me bolt upright in bed. I'd packed a small canister of pepper spray for the hiking trails, and I kept it on the nightstand next to me. When morning finally came, I was exhausted but relieved. Everything seems less threatening in daylight. I made coffee and hesitantly opened the curtains to check outside. No sign of anyone, but there were new footprints in the grass, this time leading all the way around the perimeter of the cabin, past every window, stopping at each one as if someone had stood there looking in. "Jesus," Connor muttered. Yeah. At that point, I was ready to pack up and leave. Perfect getaway be damned. But as I was throwing my stuff into my suitcase, a truck pulled into the driveway. An older man got out and introduced himself as Roger, the property caretaker. He explained he lived about 2 miles down the road and maintained several rental properties in the area. I was both relieved to see another person and suspicious about his timing. I asked him if he'd been at the property the previous night, and he seemed genuinely confused by the question. When I told him about the footprints and the figure I'd seen, he immediately volunteered to check the surrounding woods. While he was outside looking around, I noticed a folder on the kitchen counter that I hadn't seen before, or at least I was pretty sure it hadn't been there. Inside was a stack of photographs, all taken of the cabin. Vacation photos from previous guests? Sasha suggested. That's what I thought at first. But when I looked more closely, I realized they were all taken from the woods, looking at the cabin. Some during the day, some at night. In the night photos, you could see into the lit windows furniture arrangements that match the current setup. And the most recent photos showed my rental car in the driveway. I dropped the folder like it had burned me just as Roger came back inside. He said he hadn't found any signs of an intruder, but offered to check the security camera footage. Security cameras? Marcus asked. The rental had cameras? That's exactly what I said. Eliza nodded. Because the listing had specifically mentioned complete privacy with no monitoring. Roger looked uncomfortable and admitted that the owner had installed cameras around the property perimeter after an attempted break-in the previous year, but they weren't disclosed to renters because they only faced outward, not into the house. He pulled up the footage on his phone. Sure enough, the cameras caught a figure moving around the property the night before, standing at the edge of the woods, then approaching to peer into the windows. The image was grainy, night vision green, and the person wore a hooded sweatshirt that obscured their face. But here's the truly unsettling part, the timestamp on the most disturbing footage. When the figure pressed their face right up to my bedroom window was 3:17 a.m. I remembered looking at my phone at that exact time, wide awake from a noise I'd heard. But when I checked my window, I hadn't seen anyone, which meant they were there, watching me, when I was looking right at them, but somehow I couldn't see them. The property manager called the police, who actually responded this time. They took my statement and the security footage. Roger offered to stay at the property with me, but at that point, I just wanted to leave. I packed up and drove straight back to Boston that day. Did they ever catch the person? I asked. No. Eliza shook her head. But 3 days after I got home, I received an email from the rental platform. The owner apologized for my disrupted stay and offered me a full refund plus a free week in the future. What bothered me was that I hadn't complained to the platform, yet I'd only spoken to the police and Roger. I started searching online for any news about the property or similar incidents in the area. I found a local news article from about 2 years earlier about a pattern of voyeuristic behavior targeting vacation properties in the region. Several renters had reported seeing someone watching their cabins at night. Then I did something I should have done before booking. I checked the ownership records for the property. The cabin was owned by a limited liability company which was registered to a man named Roger Campbell, the same caretaker who had shown up that morning. Holy shit, Marcus whispered. Exactly. I contacted the detective handling the case and told him what I'd discovered. Turns out they were already looking into Roger. Apparently, he owned 6 rental properties in the area, all isolated cabins marketed to solo travelers or couples seeking privacy. The police searched his home and found hard drives full of photos and videos. He'd installed hidden cameras throughout all his rental properties, not just the disclosed exterior ones, but inside as well. Bedrooms, bathrooms, everywhere. He'd been recording guests for years. And that folder of photos I found? They think he deliberately left it for me to find. Part of his pattern was to gradually let his victims know they were being watched, to enjoy their growing fear. Silence fell over our circle as everyone absorbed the implications. He was arrested, of course. Eliza continued after a moment. Charged with multiple counts of invasion of privacy, trespassing, stalking, and electronic surveillance. Last I heard, he's still awaiting trial. But the worst part wasn't the cameras or even the nighttime stalking. It was realizing that the place I'd felt most relaxed, most unguarded, most myself was exactly where I was being most closely observed and violated. All those moments I thought I was finally alone. The showers, the swims in the supposedly private lake, the sleeping with windows open on hot nights, every single moment had been watched and recorded. "Did you have to testify?" Sasha asked quietly. "Not yet, but I probably will when the case goes to trial." The prosecutor said there were at least 37 different victims they could identify from the footage, going back almost 5 years. "And all those 5-star reviews?" Connor asked. "Were they fake?" "Some were. Others were from guests who genuinely enjoyed their stays, never realizing they'd been filmed." The prosecutor told me Roger was smart about I've only engaged in the more obvious stalking behavior with guests who were staying for longer periods, solo travelers, women primarily. He'd wait a few days, assess their routines and reactions, then slowly escalate. "The violation of it all is what stays with me," Eliza concluded. "Someone invading not just your privacy, but your sense of safety, your peace of mind, your ability to ever feel truly alone or unwatched again." I still check for hidden cameras in hotel rooms, vacation rentals, even dressing rooms. I still wake up sometimes convinced someone is standing outside my window, watching me sleep. The fire crackled loudly, making us all jump. Then Marcus laughed, breaking the tension. "Great, so now I'm going to be afraid of vacations. Thanks for that. You asked for scary stories." Eliza shrugged, but she was smiling now. "Besides, I'm not saying you shouldn't travel or rent cabins. Just maybe don't go for the most isolated option. And always check for hidden cameras." "How do you even do that?" I asked. "There are apps now that can detect certain types of wireless cameras. You can also turn off all the lights and use your phone's flashlight to scan the room camera. Lenses tend to reflect the light in a distinctive way. Or just do a thorough physical inspection of smoke detectors, alarm clocks, picture frames anywhere a tiny camera could be hidden." "Well," Connor said, reaching for the bag of marshmallows, "I think that's enough to make us all appropriately paranoid about the cabin we're staying in tomorrow night." "Don't worry," Eliza assured him. "I already checked this campsite thoroughly when we arrived. No cameras, no lurking Rogers." "Speaking of creepy men," Marcus said, "I actually have a story that might top both of yours. It happened when I was in college, working a summer job at a storage facility." Part 4. Marcus repositioned himself closer to the fire, rubbing his hands together as the night air grew colder. "This happened the summer before my senior year of college," he began. "I was broke-like, eating ramen for every meal, broke and desperate for a summer job. I found this position at a storage facility called Secure Lock Storage on the outskirts of Seattle. The pay was decent, and the best part was it included an air-conditioned security booth where I could study between tasks. The job itself was pretty straightforward. I worked the night shift, 8 p.m. to 4 a.m., 4 nights a week. I'd check people in and out, do hourly security rounds, and monitor the cameras. The facility was huge, over 500 units across 3 buildings, plus a separate climate-controlled section for valuable items. My first few weeks were uneventful. The night manager, Dave, trained me and then mostly left me alone. He had an office in the main building where he'd disappear for hours, supposedly doing paperwork. The owner, Mr. Reynolds, rarely showed up. And when he did, it was usually just to collect reports and deposit slips. Most nights, only a handful of customers would come by. Night access was restricted to customers with premium memberships, and they needed to check in at my booth before entering. The whole place had decent security keypad entry, surveillance cameras, good lighting. About a month into the job, I started noticing something odd. There was this one unit in building CC 157 that received visitors at least twice a week, always between midnight and 2 a.m. Different people each time, but they all followed the same pattern. They'd arrive in expensive cars, check in with minimal conversation, go to C157 for exactly 30 minutes, then leave. Being a curious college student and, honestly, bored out of my mind, I started keeping track of these visitors in a little notebook. Over 3 weeks, 12 different people visited that unit, and none of them matched the name registered to ITA John Smith, which was obviously fake. Connor laughed. Real creative with the alias. Right? Marcus nodded. Total red flag. Anyway, I asked Dave about it casually one night. His reaction was weird. He got all tense and said some premium customers value their privacy and use representatives to access their units. Then he reminded me that my job was security, not investigation. Of course, that only made me more curious. I decided to check the security footage for C157. Each building had cameras in the hallways, but not inside the units themselves for privacy reasons. The footage showed the visitors entering C157, but here's the strange part. They never carried anything in or out, not a single box, bag, or item. They'd just go in empty-handed and leave empty-handed. I started developing theories. Drug deals? Some kind of fight club? A secret gambling operation? My imagination went wild. Then one night, around 1 a.m., a new visitor arrived for C157, an older man in an expensive suit driving a Bentley. He barely glanced at me while checking in. After he'd walked away, I noticed he'd left his premium access card on my desk. I should have called after him, but instead, I decided this was my chance. I waited until he'd been in the unit for about 15 minutes, then used the master key to enter Building C through the side entrance. The hallways were well lit, but completely silent. I found C157 and stood outside, listening. Nothing. Not a sound. I was about to leave when the door suddenly opened. I froze, expecting to be caught, but no one came out. The door just opened by itself, about a foot. I could see it was dark inside, with just a faint light source somewhere in the back of the unit. Every instinct told me to walk away. Instead, I stepped closer and peered through the gap. Marcus paused, took a swig of his beer, then continued. The unit was almost empty. Just some folding chairs arranged in a circle and a small table in the center with a laptop open on it, providing the only light. The man in the suit was sitting in one of the chairs, his back to me, completely still. I couldn't see anyone else, yet the man seemed to be nodding as if listening to someone. Then he started speaking. I couldn't make out much. His voice was too low, but I distinctly heard him say, "The shipment arrives Thursday. We'll need to move quickly." I was about to back away when he suddenly turned around and looked directly at where I was standing. I don't know if he actually saw me in the darkness of the hallway, but I ran. Didn't even try to be quiet about it. Just sprinted back to my security booth and locked the door. About 20 minutes later, the man exited Building C and walked to his car without coming to retrieve his access card. Through the security window, I watched him sit in his Bentley for almost 5 minutes without starting the engine. Just sitting there, staring straight ahead. Then he finally drove away. I was seriously freaked out, but tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was some kind of video conference? Maybe he was on a Bluetooth call? I convinced myself it was probably just some weird business meeting, nothing sinister. But I still wanted to know what was happening in that unit, so I decided to check it during my next security round when it was empty. The next night, I made sure C157 had no visitors, then used the master key to open it. In the daylight, without the candles, it looked completely ordinary. Just an empty storage unit with some folding chairs stacked against the wall and a folding table. No laptop, no equipment, nothing suspicious at all. But there was something off about the space. It felt colder than the hallway, and there was this faint smell I couldn't identify. Not unpleasant, just strange. Like old books mixed with something metallic. The walls looked normal, but when I knocked on them, one section sounded hollow, like there might be a false panel or hidden compartment. I was examining this wall when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I quickly exited the unit, locked it, and pretended to be doing my regular security check. It was Dave, looking unusually tense. "What are you doing in this section?" he asked. "Your rounds were completed an hour ago." I made up something about hearing a strange noise. He didn't believe me. I could tell from his expression. But he just reminded me to stick to protocol and walked away. As he left, I noticed him taking out his phone and making a call. After that night, the visits to C-157 stopped completely. For a week, no one came. I thought maybe they'd realized someone was snooping and abandoned whatever they were doing. Then, on a Friday night, Mr. Reynolds showed up unexpectedly. He rarely came by during night shifts, so I was immediately suspicious. He was all smiles and friendly chat, asking how the job was going, if I was finding enough time to study. Then he casually mentioned they were implementing some schedule changes and wouldn't need me for the night shift anymore. They'd keep me on days if I wanted, but I'd have to share the booth with another employee, which meant less study time. I got the message. They were pushing me out. I told him I'd think about it, but we both knew I wouldn't take the day shift. As he was leaving, he said something that made my skin crawl. "Some doors are better left unopened, Marcus. Remember that for your future endeavors." I quit the next day, found another job at a campus bookstore. Less pay but normal hours, and no creepy storage units. I tried to put the whole experience behind me. 2 weeks later, I was having dinner with a friend who worked at a local news station. I casually asked if she'd ever heard anything strange about secure lock storage. Her reaction surprised Mesh, got really interested, and said they'd been investigating the owner, Mr. Reynolds, for months. Apparently, he owned several businesses suspected of being fronts for money laundering, but they could never find enough evidence. The conversation moved on, and I didn't think much more about it until about a month later when my friend called me, sounding excited. She said there had been a fire at Secure Lock Storage, specifically in Building C. Most of the units were damaged, but no one was hurt. The official cause was electrical failure. I asked if she knew which units were destroyed. She checked her notes and said, "Most of Building C, but they're specifically mentioning Unit C-157 as the origin point." "Why? Did you store something there?" I told her no, but my curiosity was reignited. I drove by the facility a few days later. Building C was gutted, with fire investigators still working the scene. As I was watching from across the street, a black Bentley pulled up the same one I'd seen that night. The older man in the suit got out and spoke with the investigators for a few minutes, then drove away. I never found out what was really happening in C-157. Maybe it was just money laundering or drug trafficking. But about a year later, I was reading the local news when I came across an article about a major bust involving an international human trafficking ring. Several wealthy businessmen in the Seattle area had been arrested. And there, in one of the photos of the accused, was the man in the suit I'd seen at the storage facility, identified as a real estate developer named Victor Hargrove. The article mentioned that the ring had been using storage facilities as transit points for moving people undetected. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if I'd reported what I saw that night. Maybe they would have caught these people sooner. Maybe some victims would have been spared. But I was young, scared, and convinced myself it wasn't my problem. As Marcus finished his story, the fire crackled loudly, sending sparks into the night air. We all sat quietly for a moment, absorbing his tale. "You couldn't have known," Sasha said softly. "And if these people were as dangerous as they sound, reporting them might have put you in serious danger." "Maybe," Marcus shrugged, "but I still feel guilty sometimes. When he said that thing about doors better left unopened, I think he was giving me a warning, and I took it. I walked away because it was easier." "We all make choices based on self-preservation," Connor observed. "Hard to blame yourself for that." "The truly disturbing part," I added, "is thinking about how many operations like that might be happening right under our noses. Behind ordinary doors, in regular buildings we pass every day, terrible things could be going on that we never notice. That's what keeps me up at night, Marcus admitted. Not just what I saw, but everything I didn't see. Everything happening in plain sight that we choose not to look at too closely. Connor stood up, stretching. Anyone need another drink before the next story? I think we could all use one after that. As Connor distributed fresh beers, I glanced at the darkness surrounding our campsite. The trees seemed to press in closer, the shadows between them deeper and more secretive. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted, the sound echoing through the silent forest. "Your turn, Connor," Eliza said when he returned to his seat. "What's your scary story?" Connor settled back down, his face serious in the firelight. "Mine happened just last year, actually. It's about moving into a new neighborhood and discovering that sometimes the real horror isn't what people do to strangers, it's what they do to protect their communities from outsiders." Part 5. Connor leaned back, the firelight casting his face in an amber glow. He took a slow sip of his beer before starting his story. "So, last year I finally saved up enough for a down payment on a house. After months of searching, I found this charming craftsman in Northeast Portland. 3 bedrooms, original hardwood floors, big backyard. It needed some work, but the price was right, especially considering the neighborhood. The realtor mentioned it had been on the market for a while, but attributed that to the seller's unrealistic expectations rather than any issues with the property itself. I moved in last September. The first few weeks were a blur of unpacking, painting, and learning all the quirks of an older home. You know, which light switches control what, which floorboards creak, that kind of thing. I was so busy, I barely had time to meet my neighbors. Just quick waves and hellos as I came and went. The house to my right had an older couple who brought me cookies. The one to my left was similar to mine, but in much worse condition. Peeling paint, overgrown yard, always dark. I assumed it was vacant until about a month after I moved in. I was working in the yard one evening when I noticed a man standing at the fence line between our properties. He was tall, thin, probably in his 60s, with this shock of white hair. He didn't say anything, just stood there watching me rake leaves. I waved and introduced myself. He nodded, but didn't offer his name. After an awkward silence, he said, "The previous owners didn't maintain the boundary properly." Before I could ask what he meant, he pointed to a row of bushes along our property line. "Those are on my side. You should not touch them." The bushes were clearly on my property, at least 3 feet from the fence, but I didn't want to start a neighborly dispute my first month there. I just nodded and said I'd keep that in mind. He stared at me for another uncomfortable moment, then walked back to his house. Over the next few weeks, I saw him occasionally through his windows or in his backyard, always at dusk or early evening, never during daylight hours. He never waved or acknowledged me again, but I often had the sensation of being watched when I was outside. Then the notes started, handwritten, slipped under my door or left in my mailbox. The first one said, "Your outdoor lights disturb my evening activities. Please turn them off by 8 p.m. I had installed motion sensor security lights, standard stuff. I ignored the note. The next one came a week later. "Your music crosses the boundary. Silence after sunset is appreciated." I barely played music, and never loudly. After that, the notes became more frequent and increasingly bizarre. "The chemicals in your laundry detergent cross the boundary and cause reactions. Your cooking smells violate the natural order of the boundary. And the strangest, the boundary weakens when you sleep with your windows open." Marcus interrupted. "Wait, was this guy insane or what?" "That's what I started to wonder," Connor nodded. "I mentioned him to my neighbors on the other side, the older couple. They exchanged looks and told me Mr. Kelvin had lived there for decades and mostly kept to himself. They advised me to respect his privacy and said he was particular about boundaries, but otherwise harmless. I tried to follow their advice, but the notes kept coming, getting weirder and more threatening. Boundaries crossed cannot be uncrossed. What enters may not leave. The last straw was finding one that said, "I have watched you sleep through the weakened boundary. Shore up your defenses or accept the consequences." I installed security cameras after that and seriously considered filing a police report. But when I reviewed the camera footage to document him leaving the notes, something strange happened. The cameras showed no one approaching my door or mailbox at the times the notes appeared. In one video, I was clearly walking from my car to the front door, nothing in my hand. As I reached for the door, I glanced down, and there was a note on the welcome mat that hadn't been there seconds before. The camera didn't show it appearing, it was just suddenly there. I convinced myself there was a technical issue with the cameras, or the notes were being delivered from an angle the cameras couldn't capture. I even wondered if the older couple might be playing some elaborate prank, though that seemed unlikely. Things escalated when I started renovating my bathroom. The first day of construction, I came home to find all the workers' tools scattered across the yard, some broken. The workers swore they'd packed everything properly, and my security cameras showed no one entering the property. That night, the most disturbing note yet appeared. Altering structures disturbs the boundary irrevocably. Consequences imminent. I'd had enough. The next morning, I went to Mr. Kelvin's house, determined to confront him. I knocked repeatedly, but no one answered, even though I was sure I'd seen movement behind the curtains. Finally, I wrote my own note. Please stop leaving messages at my house and tampering with my property, and pushed it through his mail slot. That night, I was awakened around 3 a.m. by what sounded like someone dragging something heavy across my attic. I didn't even know my house had an accessible attic. I searched and found a small hatch in the hallway ceiling that I'd previously assumed was an access panel for electrical work. I got a ladder and a flashlight, heart pounding as I opened the hatch. The attic was empty, just insulation, rafters, and dust. No sign that anyone had been up there. But as I was closing the hatch, I noticed something odd. The north wall of the attic, the one that would be adjacent to Mr. Kelvin's house, had strange markings on its symbols drawn in what looked like charcoal or ash. I took photos, then closed up the attic and double-checked all my doors and windows. Everything was locked, no signs of forced entry. The next day, I showed the photos to a friend who's into historical architecture. She said the symbols looked like old property line markers, possibly dating back to when the houses were first built. She mentioned that in the early 1900s, some homeowners were superstitious about property boundaries and would mark them to keep negative energies from crossing. I was pretty freaked out by this point and seriously considered selling the house. But the real estate market had dipped, and I would have taken a significant loss. So instead, I installed more security measures, better cameras, door sensors, even an alarm system. A week passed with no notes and no strange occurrences. I started to relax, thinking maybe my note or the security measures had worked. Then I noticed something unusual about the bushes Mr. Kelvin had claimed were on his property. They were dying, despite the rainy Portland autumn. Within days, they went from healthy to completely brown. I decided to remove them and plant something new. As I was digging out the root ball of the first bush, my shovel hit something hard. I cleared away more dirt, expecting a rock, but instead found a small metal box about the size of a thick book. The box was old, covered in tarnish, with no visible opening mechanism. It had strange markings etched into the metal similar to the symbols I'd found in my attic. I probably should have left it buried, but curiosity got the better of me. I brought it inside and managed to pry it open with a screwdriver. Inside was a bunch of yellowed papers covered in spidery handwriting, most in what looked like German, and a small cloth pouch. I carefully opened the pouch and found what appeared to be old photographs, black and white images of my house and Mr. Kelvin's house from what must have been the 1940s or 50s. One photo showed a family standing in front of my house parents and 3 children. Another showed a single man standing in front of Mr. Kelvin's house. Written on the back of that one was, Klaus Kelvin, 1943. As I was examining these items, all the lights in my house flickered, then went out. Power outage, I assumed. I set everything back in the box and went to find candles. When I returned, the box was gone. I searched everywhere, convinced I must have moved it without realizing. But it had vanished. And when I looked outside, I saw that every house on the street had lights except for mine and Mr. Kelvin's. I called the power company, who said they showed no outage in my area. A technician came the next day but couldn't find any issues with my electrical system. As he was leaving, he asked, "Is that your neighbor? and pointed to Mr. Kelvin, who was standing at our property line watching us. "Yes," I said. The technician frowned. "He was standing in exactly the same spot, same position, when I arrived an hour ago. Hasn't moved an inch. Kinda creepy." I looked back, and sure enough, Mr. Kelvin was standing completely motionless, staring at my house. When he saw me notice him, he raised one hand slowly and pointed at the spot where I dug up the box. That night, I barely slept. Around dawn, I heard a scratching sound at my bedroom window. When I looked, there was nothing there, but written in the condensation on the inside of the glass were the words, "Return it." I was done. I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend. When I told him what was happening, he insisted we call the police. 2 officers came to take my statement, clearly skeptical but professional. They agreed to visit Mr. Kelvin and speak with him. Later that day, they called me. Mr. Kelvin had answered his door and allowed them inside. They described him as eccentric but lucid. He denied leaving any notes or entering my property. When they asked about the boundary he allegedly kept mentioning, he calmly explained he was referring to the property line and his concerns about encroachment. The officers said his house was cluttered but not unusual for an elderly person living alone. No evidence of threatening behavior. They suggested it might be neighborhood kids playing pranks with the notes, and recommended I install better outdoor lighting. I wasn't convinced, but didn't have much choice. I returned home, but invited my friend to stay with me for a few days. Nothing strange happened while he was there. The night after he left, though, I woke to the sound of my phone ringing. It was 3:17 a.m., and the caller ID showed my own number. I didn't answer. The phone rang again immediately. Same thing. On the 3rd call, I picked up but said nothing. The line was silent except for what sounded like distant tapping. Then a voice whispered, "The boundary is broken." I hung up and turned off my phone. In the silence that followed, I became aware of a rhythmic sound coming from the wall between my house and Mr. Kelvin's slow, deliberate knocking. 3 knocks, pause. 3 knocks, pause. I didn't go investigate. Instead, I barricaded myself in the bedroom until dawn. In the morning light, everything seemed normal again. I almost convinced myself I'd had a particularly vivid nightmare. That afternoon, I was in my front yard when a mail carrier approached not my regular one, but an older woman. She asked if I was the new owner, and when I confirmed, she hesitated, then said, "You know, I've been delivering on this route for 27 years. That house has always troubled me." She nodded toward Mr. Kelvin's place. I asked what she meant, and she explained that mail delivery there was strange. He gets letters with no return address, all addressed to different names but all delivered to him. And in all my years, I've only seen him in person twice, both times at dusk, both times standing exactly at the property line. Before leaving, she said something that made my blood run cold. "The previous owners of your house only lasted 11 months. The ones before them, 14. No one stays." That night, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I waited until well after midnight, then went into my backyard with a shovel. I dug a hole exactly where I'd found the box and placed inside it a note. "I don't have what you're looking for. Please leave me alone." I covered it up and went back inside. As I was washing the dirt off my hands, all the faucets in the house turned on simultaneous: kitchen, bathrooms, laundry room. I ran from room to room, turning them off. When I reached the last one, I heard my front door open and close. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and cautiously approached the front of the house. No one was there, but on the floor was a note in the same handwriting as before. "Not what I seek. The boundary needs what was taken. You have until the new moon." The new moon was 3 days away. I spent those days researching the history of my house and Mr. Kelvin's, looking for any explanation. I discovered that originally, back in the 1920s, they had been a single property with one large house. After a fire in 1943, the property was divided and 2 smaller houses, the current ones, were built. The fire had claimed the lives of the entire family except for one son who was away at the time. The newspaper article included a photo of the surviving Sona young man with distinctive white blonde hair, identified as Klaus Kelvin. The same night I made this discovery, I hired a private investigator to look into Mr. Kelvin. What he found didn't make sense. There was no record of a Klaus Kelvin living at that address. In current database says no utility bills, no property tax records in that name, no driver's license, nothing. The property was officially owned by a trust established in 1944. But the land records showed something even stranger. The property line between our houses had been redrawn multiple times over the decades, with small adjustments each time a new owner moved into my house. Each time, Mr. Kelvin's property expanded slightly, and mine shrank. On the night of the new moon, I left. I didn't even pack a bag. I just got in my car and drove to a hotel across town. I called in sick to work for the next 3 days and didn't return to the house. When I finally did go back, I half expected to find it ransacked or burned down. But everything looked normal. Too normal. The dying bushes along the property line were suddenly healthy again. No more notes appeared. No more strange noises in the night. For about a week, things were peaceful. I started to think maybe whatever boundary issue had been resolved somehow. Then I received a letter from a real estate agent, not my original one, but someone representing a buyer interested in my house. The offer was substantially above market value, all cash, no inspection required. The buyer's name wasn't listed, but the agent mentioned they owned adjacent property and wanted to reunify the original lot. I accepted without hesitation. The paperwork was processed with unusual speed. I never returned to the house except for the closing, which the buyer didn't attend in person. Everything was handled through an attorney. As I was leaving for the last time, I noticed the older couple from the other neighboring house watching me from their porch. I walked over to say goodbye. They seemed unsurprised that I was leaving so soon. "Did you know Mr. Kelvin would buy my house?" I asked. The woman nodded. "He always does. Every time." "What do you mean, every time?" The man sighed. "We've lived here 30 years. Watched him buy back that house 6 times now. Different owners, different reasons for leaving. Same result. It always goes back to him. But why? What does he want with both properties?" They exchanged looks. Finally, the woman said, "We think he's trying to put something back together that was broken a long time ago. Something about the family that died in the fire. He was one of them, the only survivor." "That's impossible," I said. "That fire was in 1943. He'd be in his 90s at least." "Yes," the man said simply. "He would be." I drove away and never went back to that neighborhood. 3 months later, I was reading the local news online and saw a small article about a construction project in northeast Portland. The city had approved a permit to demolish 2 adjacent craftsman homes and rebuild a single, larger residence matching historical photographs of the original house that had stood on the property in the 1920s and 30s. The article mentioned that the permit applicant was a historical preservation trust established by Klaus Kelvin. It included a quote from the trust's representative. "Some boundaries were never meant to be drawn. Some divisions should be healed." Connor leaned back, his story finished. We all stared into the fire, absorbing the tale. "So what do you think was really going on?" Eliza finally asked. "Some kind of mental illness, a family obsession passed down through generations?" Connor shrugged. I don't know. The most logical explanation is that Mr. Kelvin was probably a relative of the original Klaus, maybe a son or grandson who inherited both the property and the family obsession with reuniting the lots. The neighbors might have confused him with the original owner, or maybe he even encouraged that confusion. As for the weird occurrences, the appearing notes, the missing box, the faucets turning on, I was under a lot of stress, working long hours, living alone in an old house that made plenty of strange noises. Maybe I imagined some of it, or maybe someone was gaslighting me to drive me out. "What about the property line adjustments?" I asked. "That sounds pretty concrete." "That part was real," Connor confirmed. "I saw the records myself. Somehow, with each new owner, the property line shifted slightly. Maybe he was bribing surveyors, or maybe he was just gradually moving the fence over decades. Either way, he was playing a very long game. The truly unsettling part," Connor continued, "isn't the possibility of something supernatural. It's the idea that a person, or maybe a family, could be so obsessed with a specific piece of land, a specific boundary, that they'd devote their entire existence to reclaiming it, piece by piece, inch by inch, year after year. That kind of patient, relentless fixation is what really disturbs me. "Did you ever try to find out more about him after you moved?" Marcus asked. I thought about it, but honestly, I wanted to put the whole experience behind me. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Whatever was happening in that house, whoever Kelvin really was, I'm content not knowing. Connor tossed another log on the fire. "Well, you've officially set the bar high for creepy stories. Who's next?" The flames surged with the new fuel, casting our shadows long against the surrounding trees. In the distance, something rustled in the underbrush, probably just a small nocturnal animal. But in the wake of Connor's story, every sound seemed suddenly significant, potentially sinister. I glanced at my watch. It was well past midnight now. Maybe we should call it a night and save the rest for tomorrow? Afraid of bad dreams? Eliza teased gently. No, I smiled, though there was some truth to her suggestion. Just thinking we've got a full day of hiking ahead tomorrow before we reach the cabin. The supposedly haunted cabin, Marcus reminded us with exaggerated spookiness in his voice. It's not haunted, Connor assured us. Just old and creaky, like any mountain cabin. But I have to admit, after all these stories, I'm looking at our weekend accommodations in a slightly different light. We agreed to turn in, banking the fire carefully before retreating to our respective tents. As I zipped myself into my sleeping bag, I couldn't help but think about all the stories we'd shared: the maintenance man invading private spaces, the surgeon covering up his mistakes, the vacation rental owner filming his guests, the traffickers using storage units, the neighbor obsessed with boundaries. The world suddenly seemed full of hidden threats, of ordinary places concealing extraordinary horrors, of everyday people harboring unimaginable secrets. And tomorrow, we'd be staying in a remote cabin, miles from help, with only each other for protection. I closed my eyes, trying to focus on the innocent sounds of the night forest rather than the lingering echoes of our campfire tales. But sleep was a long time coming, and when it did, my dreams were troubled by figures watching from just beyond the light, by boundaries being crossed that never should have been, by the slow, patient malice of those who have all the time in the world to wait for what they want. Part 6. Morning came with fog lingering between the trees, transforming our campsite into an isolated island in a sea of gray. We packed up in relative silence, each of us still carrying the weight of last night's stories. "Did anyone else have weird dreams?" Marcus asked as we loaded our backpacks into Connor's SUV for the short drive to the trailhead. "I think we all did," Eliza replied, glancing at me. "Sharing horror stories before bed isn't exactly a recipe for peaceful sleep." The drive to the trailhead took about 20 minutes, winding through increasingly remote mountain roads. Connor had explained that we'd need to hike about 5 miles to reach the cabin, which was only accessible by foot. "Remind me again why we couldn't just stay in a hotel?" Marcus grumbled as we shouldered our packs at the deserted trailhead. "Because this is supposed to be an authentic wilderness experience," Connor replied, checking his map. "Besides, the cabin's been in my family for generations. My grandfather built it in the 60s. Has anyone stayed there recently?" Sasha asked, adjusting her pack straps. "My uncle was up here about 6 months ago to check on it. Said everything was in good shape, just a little dusty." He pointed to a narrow path leading into the pines. "That's our route. Should take us about 3 hours at a steady pace." The trail started easily enough, a gentle climb through dense forest, the path clearly visible despite being less maintained than popular hiking routes. The fog began to burn off as the morning progressed, sunlight filtering through the canopy in dappled patterns. For the first hour, conversation flowed naturally, focused on mundane topics far removed from last night's stories. Then Sasha, who was hiking just ahead of me, stopped abruptly. "Did you guys see that?" she asked, pointing toward a dense thicket about 50 yards off the trail. "See what?" I asked, following her gaze. "I thought I saw someone moving through the trees. A flash of colored, I think." Connor shook his head. "Probably just a bird. Cardinal, maybe." "It seemed bigger than a bird," Sasha insisted. "Like a person wearing red." We all stood still. watching the thicket, but nothing moved. This trail does connect to the Pacific Crest at some point, Connor offered. Could be through hikers taking a detour. We continued, but I noticed we all scanned the surrounding forest more carefully now. About half an hour later, I heard a cracking sound off to our left, like a branch breaking under weight. From the way everyone tensed, I knew they'd heard it too. "Hello?" Connor called out. "Anyone there?" No response. Just the gentle rustle of wind through pine needles. "Maybe a deer," Eliza suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. The trail steepened, requiring more focus to navigate the increasingly rocky terrain. We fell into single file, conserving energy for the climb. When we stopped for a water break at a clearing about 2 hours in, Marcus pulled me aside. "Is it just me, or does it feel like we're being watched?" he asked quietly. "It's not just you," I admitted. "But after last night's stories, we're all probably a bit paranoid." "Maybe." He glanced back at the trail we descended. "I just keep thinking I see movement at the edge of my vision. When I turn to look, there's nothing there." I was about to reply when Connor called us over to see the view. From our elevated position, we could see for miles rolling mountains covered in dark green forest, a silver ribbon of river in the valley far below, and no sign of human habitation in any direction. "How much farther?" Sasha asked, drinking deeply from her water bottle. "Another hour, maybe less," Connor replied. "The cabin's just over that ridge." He pointed to a rocky outcropping ahead. As we rested, I noticed Eliza wandering along the edge of the clearing, staring intently at the ground. "Find something interesting?" I called to her. She looked up, her expression troubled. "Maybe. Come look at this." I walked over, followed by the others. She was pointing at a distinctive footprint in a patch of soft eartha boot print, but not from any of our hiking boots. This was larger, with a different tread pattern. "Someone else has been on this trail recently," she said. "Like I mentioned, probably just other hikers," Connor said, but he frowned as he studied the print. "Though not many people know about this particular trail." "There's more," Eliza said, moving a few feet away. "Look, a whole set of tracks, and they're not going along the trail, they're paralleling it, staying just inside the tree line." Sure enough, a line of similar prints skirted the edge of the clearing before disappearing into the underbrush. "As if someone's been following the trail but not walking on it," Sasha said quietly. "Following us, maybe?" "Okay, let's not jump to conclusions," Connor said, though his casual tone sounded forced. "This is public land. People are allowed to hike wherever they want. But why would someone hike through rough underbrush when there's a perfectly good trail?" Marcus challenged. "Hunters sometimes do that," Connor suggested. "Or wildlife photographers trying to stay hidden." "Is hunting allowed here?" I asked. "Not in this season, no," Connor admitted. We stood in uneasy silence, staring at the footprints. Finally, Eliza shouldered her pack. "Standing here speculating isn't helping. Let's just get to the cabin before dark." The final leg of our hike was tense, conversation minimal as we each retreated into our thoughts. I found myself constantly scanning the forest around us, startling at every snapped twig or rustling leaf. The stories from last night kept replaying in my mind, violations of privacy, strangers with unknown intentions, boundaries crossed. We were about 15 minutes from the cabin, according to Connor, when Sasha gasped. She'd been leading our single-file line and had stopped so suddenly that Marcus almost bumped into her. "What the hell is that?" she whispered, pointing ahead. About 20 feet off the trail hung a crude bundle from a tree branch. As we approached cautiously, I could make out what looked like animal bones and strips of fur arranged in a roughly human shape, tied together with dark red twine. It twisted slightly in the breeze, casting a moving shadow on the forest floor. "Some kind of hunting trophy?" Marcus suggested, his voice uncertain. "No hunter I know would do that," Connor said. He approached the bundle and examined it without touching. This was deliberately placed to be seen from the trail. "By who? And why?" Eliza asked. "Probably local kids playing pranks," Connor said, but he was scanning the surrounding forest with heightened attention. The main hiking trails have had issues with teenagers doing weird stuff to scare tourists. "Let's keep moving." But the damage was done. The bundle had shattered our forced casualness, confirming that someone else was in these woods, someone who wanted us to know of their presence. We quickened our pace, pushing through fatigue to reach the cabin as soon as possible. When the structure finally came into view, a rustic A-frame nestled in a small clearing, I felt a rush of relief mixed with apprehension. The cabin looked exactly as Connor had described. It weathered wood exterior, small covered porch, windows shuttered against the elements. It was the picture of isolated mountain charm, the kind of place that would appear idyllic under normal circumstances. Connor unlocked the front door, which creaked open to reveal a cozy interior. Main room with a stone fireplace, small kitchen area, ladder leading to a loft sleeping space. It smelled of pine and wood smoke and distant summers. "Home sweet home," Connor announced, dropping his pack. "Let's get settled and then I'll show you around." We moved through the small cabin, claiming sleeping spots and exploring the basic amenities. There was no electricity, but propane lamps provided light, and a wood stove offered both heat and a cooking surface. A hand pump at the kitchen sink drew water from a hillside spring. Basic, but comfortable. While the others unpacked, I wandered onto the porch, scanning the surrounding forest. From this vantage point, I could see back down the trail we'd ascended, the path winding through trees before disappearing around a bend. That's when I noticed Ida flash of red, just like Sasha had described, moving between trees about 100 yards down the trail. Then gone, so quickly I might have imagined it. "See something?" Eliza asked, coming to stand beside me. "I'm not sure," I said. "Thought I saw movement down the trail." She leaned against the porch railing, her expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about those footprints, and that thing hanging from the tree. It feels deliberate, like someone wants us on edge. But who? And why?" I echoed her earlier questions. "I don't know, but I'm not convinced by Connor's casual explanations either." She lowered her voice. "Have you noticed he seems more tense than he's letting on? Like he knows more than he's saying." Before I could respond, Connor called from inside, asking for help starting the fire. I followed Eliza back into the cabin, but her observation stuck with me. Connor did seem to be forcing his cheerfulness, dismissing concerns too quickly. As evening approached, we fell into the practical tasks of setting up our temporary home-gathering firewood, preparing a simple dinner, finding lanterns and extra blankets. The physical activity helped dispel some of the unease that had followed us up the mountain. After dinner, we gathered around the crackling fireplace, the cabin's interior transformed into a haven of warm light against the gathering darkness outside. Connor produced a bottle of whiskey, and we passed it around as the tension of the day's hike gradually melted away. "I've been thinking," Marcus said after his second drink. "Maybe we should take turns keeping watch tonight." "Keeping watch?" Connor laughed. "For what? Bears?" "You know what for," Marcus replied. "Someone's out there. Someone who left those tracks and hung that creepy bone thing." "You're overreacting," Connor said dismissively. "We're miles from anywhere. The cabin's solid, and the door has a good lock." "I'm with Marcus," Sasha interjected. "After everything we saw today, I'd sleep better knowing someone was keeping an eye out." I nodded in agreement, and after a moment's hesitation, Eliza did too. Connor looked around at our faces and sighed. "Fine. If it makes everyone feel better, we can take 2-hour shifts. But you're all letting your imaginations run wild after those stories last night." We drew straws to determine the watch order Connor first, then me, Marcus, Eliza, and finally Sasha until dawn. With that decided, those not on immediate duty prepared for bed. The loft had space for 3 sleeping bags, while 2 more could fit in the main room near the fire. As I settled into my sleeping bag in the loft, listening to Connor moving around downstairs on his watch, I found myself thinking about what Eliza had said. Did Connor know more than he was telling us? Was there something about these woods, this cabin, that he hadn't shared? Despite my exhaustion from the day's hike, sleep came fitfully. When Connor woke me from my shift, I was already half awake, listening to the chorus of night sounds, the creak of the cabin settling, the soft breathing of my friends, the distant calls of nocturnal birds. "Anything happened during your watch?" I whispered as I climbed down from the loft. "Just the usual cabin noises," Connor replied, yawning. "Nothing to worry about." He headed up to the loft while I positioned myself in a chair by the window, parting the curtains slightly to see outside. The clearing around the cabin was bathed in moonlight. The surrounding forest, a wall of impenetrable darkness. For the first hour of my watch, the night remained peaceful. I stoked the fire occasionally, its light casting shifting shadows across the cabin walls. I was beginning to think our concerns were indeed overblown when I heard a soft, rhythmic tapping on the cabin's exterior wall. At first, I thought it might be a branch moved by the wind, but there was no wind tonight, and the sound was too regular, too deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Like a signal, I moved silently to the window nearest the sound, peering cautiously through a gap in the curtains. At first, I saw nothing in the moonlit clearing. Then a movement caught my eye, a figure, standing at the edge of the forest. Just standing there, watching the cabin. Even from this distance, I could make out a splash of Reda jacket or shirt. My heart pounding, I debated whether to wake the others. The figure wasn't approaching the cabin, wasn't doing anything threatening beyond its silent vigil. As I watched, it raised one hand in what almost seemed like a greeting or a warning, then stepped backward into the trees and disappeared. I spent the rest of my shift alternating between watching the windows and trying to convince myself there was an innocent explanation for what I'd seen. A lost hiker, perhaps, who had noticed our lights and was considering asking for help before thinking better of it. When it was time to wake Marcus for his shift, I hesitated. Should I tell him about the figure? In the end, I decided to mention the tapping, but not the watcher in the woods. No need to escalate the unease we were all feeling. I heard some tapping on the east wall, I told him quietly. Probably just the cabin settling, but keep an ear out for it. Marcus nodded seriously, taking his position in the watch chair as I headed up to the loft. Despite my exhaustion, sleep continued to elude me. I kept seeing that distant figure, its raised hand, the deliberate way it had stepped back into the darkness. I must have eventually drifted off, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the cabin windows, and the smell of coffee filled the air. I climbed down to find Eliza and Sasha already up, heating water on the wood stove. "Where are Connor and Marcus?" I asked, accepting a steaming mug from Eliza. "Connor went to check the spring something about making sure the water line wasn't frozen," Eliza replied. "Marcus is out collecting more firewood." "How were the night watches?" I asked Sasha, who had taken the final shift. "Quiet," she said. "But Marcus mentioned you heard tapping?" "Yeah, on the east wall. Did either of you hear anything similar?" They both shook their heads. "Though I did notice something odd during my watch," Eliza added. "The firewood pile outside has been rearranged. I'm sure of it. The logs were stacked one way when we arrived, and by my shift, they were completely different. Maybe Connor or Marcus moved them?" Sasha suggested. "Without making any noise? While we were all supposedly watching?" Eliza raised an eyebrow. "And why would they bother?" We fell silent as the cabin door opened and Marcus entered, arms full of fresh firewood. "Morning," he greeted us, dumping the wood next to the stove. "Beautiful day out there. Not a cloud in sight." "Any sign of our watcher?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Marcus gave me a strange look. "So you saw someone too? I thought I was imagining things." "What do you mean, too?" Eliza asked sharply. Marcus hesitated, glancing between us. "During my watch, around 2 a.m., I saw someone moving around the woodpile. I was about to go out and confront them when they just walked into the forest. Didn't run, didn't try to hide, just calmly walked away." "Why didn't you wake us?" Sasha demanded. "For the same reason Daniel probably didn't mention seeing someone," Marcus replied, looking at me knowingly. I didn't want to panic everyone over what might have been nothing. I nodded reluctantly. "I saw someone too, standing at the forest edge, watching the cabin." "Okay, that's it," Sasha said firmly. "We need to talk to Connor. If there are strangers hanging around this cabin in the middle of the night, we need to take this seriously." As if on cue, the door opened again and Connor entered, carrying a plastic container of water. "Take what seriously?" he asked, setting down the container. "The fact that both Daniel and Marcus saw someone outside the cabin last night," Eliza said bluntly. "Someone who was watching us." Connor's expression flickered surprise. then something that might have been resignation. "Sit down," he said heavily. "There's something I need to tell you." Part 7. We gathered around the small kitchen table, mugs of steaming coffee before us, as Connor took a deep breath and began to speak. "I haven't been entirely honest with you about this place," he admitted, his eyes fixed on the worn wooden surface. "This cabin has a history that I simplified when I invited you all here." "What kind of history?" Eliza asked, her voice carrying an edge. Connor ran a hand through his hair. "You remember I told you my grandfather built this cabin in the 60s? That part is true. But I didn't tell you why he built it or what happened here." He took a long sip of his coffee, as if fortifying himself. "My grandfather, Walter Walsh, was a psychology professor at the university. In 1967, he began conducting what he called isolation experiments, here studying the psychological effects of prolonged solitude in a remote setting. He'd bring subjects up here usually, graduate students or colleagues for extended stays, monitoring their mental state through journals they kept and interviews upon their return. That sounds ethically questionable, even for the 60s, Sasha commented. It was, Connor nodded. Especially considering he didn't always fully inform participants about the nature of the experiment. Some thought they were just having a wilderness retreat, not realizing they were being studied. In 1972, something went wrong. A subjecta young psychology grad student named Richard Keller was scheduled for a 2-week isolation period. My grandfather dropped him off with supplies and the usual instructions to maintain a daily journal. When he returned 2 weeks later, Keller was gone. "Gone as in left early?" Marcus asked. "Gone as in vanished," Connor corrected. His belongings were still here, including his journal. There was no sign of foul play, no evidence he'd been injured or attacked by an animal. He had simply disappeared. What did the journal say? I found myself asking. Connor's expression darkened. It started normally observations about the surroundings, his daily routines, reflections on the experience of solitude. But around day 5, the entries changed. He began writing about feeling watched, about seeing movement at the edge of the clearing, about hearing tapping on the walls at night. A chill ran through me as I exchanged glances with Marcus. The tapping we'd both heard. By day 10, his writing had become increasingly paranoid. He claimed someone was entering the cabin while he slept, moving his belongings, standing over his bed. The final entry, dated day 12, just said, "They're coming to collect me tonight. They say I'm one of them now." Silence fell over the cabin as we absorbed this information. Outside, a bird called, the sound unnervingly normal against the backdrop of Connor's story. "What did the police say?" Sasha finally asked. "They conducted a search, of course. Found nothing. No tracks leading away from the cabin except my grandfather's own. They eventually concluded that Keller had suffered some kind of psychological break and wandered off. His body was never found." "That's disturbing," Eliza said. "But it was 50 years ago. What does it have to do with what Marcus and Daniel saw last night?" Connor sighed. "Because Keller wasn't the only disappearance. In 1984, a hiker named Thomas Reed took shelter here during a storm. He was reported missing when he failed to return from his trip. Rangers found the cabin locked from the inside, his gear still there, no sign of where he'd gone. In 1997, my father loaned the cabin to a colleague for a weekend writing retreat. She vanished, leaving behind a half-written manuscript with increasingly disjointed notes in the margins about watchers in the woods. And most recently, in 2010, my cousin stayed here with 2 friends. One of the friends disappeared during the night. The official report said he probably got disoriented going to relieve himself in the dark and fell from one of the nearby cliffs. "Jesus, Connor," Marcus exploded. "You brought us to a cabin where 4 people have disappeared and you didn't think that was worth mentioning?" "I don't believe the stories," Connor said defensively. "My family's always attributed them to the isolation playing tricks on people's minds, or to misadventure in dangerous terrain. I've stayed here dozens of times without incident. But you've never stayed with exactly 4 other people, have you?" Eliza asked quietly. Connor stared at her. "How did you know that?" 4 disappearances. 4 of us besides you, she pointed out. And now someone's watching the cabin, leaving signs for us to find, like that bone thing on the trail. It's not a coincidence. You think someone is targeting us specifically? Sasha asked, her voice tight with tension. I think Connor knew exactly what might happen when he invited 4 people to this cabin, and he brought us anyway, Eliza said coldly. That's not fair, Connor protested. I told you I don't believe the stories. My grandfather documented psychological effects of extended isolation hallucinations, paranoia. That explains the journals, the reported watchers. It doesn't explain 4 missing people, I countered, or what we saw last night. Someone is out there, Connor. Someone real. Okay, he conceded, raising his hands placatingly. I admit I should have told you the full history, but I genuinely don't believe there's any real danger. The local rangers attribute the disappearances to the rough terrain, wild animals, and people underestimating the wilderness. But you still set up a night watch, Marcus pointed out. So part of you is concerned. Connor hesitated. I suggested the watch because I could tell everyone was uneasy after finding those footprints and that thing hanging from the tree. I wanted you to feel safe. We need to leave, Sasha said firmly. Now, today. I'm not staying another night in this place. I agree, Eliza nodded. Whatever is happening here, I don't want to be part of it. The hike back to the trailhead would take 3 hours in good conditions, Connor reminded us. It's already mid-morning. By the time we pack up and get moving, we'd be cutting it close to reach the car before dark. So we hurry, Marcus insisted. Better than spending another night here. There's something else to consider, Connor said reluctantly. Something I noticed at the spring this morning. Footprints, a lot of them. Different sizes, different boots. I'd estimate at least 3 or 4 people have been moving around in the woods near the cabin. And some of the prints were fresh from this morning. A heavy silence fell over the group as we processed this new information. You think we're being surrounded? I asked quietly. I think, Connor replied carefully, that hiking out might be exactly what they're expecting us to do. We'd be vulnerable on the trail spread out, loaded down with gear, focused on making good time rather than watching our surroundings. So we're trapped? Sasha asked, her voice rising slightly. That's what you're saying? Not trapped, Connor corrected. Just in need of a more strategic approach than panicked flight. Great, Marcus muttered. Survival strategy from the guy who brought us to a disappearance hotspot without warning. My uncle is scheduled to check on us tomorrow morning, Connor offered. If we don't meet him at the trailhead as planned, he'll come up to the cabin. And he always brings his satellite phone. We can call for help then. Unless he's part of whatever this is, Eliza said sharply. Connor's expression hardened. That's my family you're talking about. Whatever you think of me right now, my uncle has nothing to do with this. Sorry, Eliza said, not sounding particularly apologetic. But you can understand our trust is a bit shaken. Look, I interjected, trying to diffuse the tension. Arguing won't help. We need to decide. Risk the trail today, or secure the cabin and wait for Connor's uncle tomorrow. After some heated debate, we reluctantly agreed to stay. The cabin, for all its disturbing history, offered shelter, resources, and defensible space. The trail would leave us exposed and separated. We would secure the cabin as best we could, maintain a constant watch, and be ready to leave at first light the next day. With a plan in place, we set about fortifying our temporary fortress. Connor and Marcus checked the perimeter, ensuring all windows were securely shuttered and identifying potential vulnerabilities. Sasha and I inventoried our supplies, while Eliza, who had some first aid training, assembled a medical kit from our combined resources. As I helped Sasha reorganize our food stores, she spoke in a low voice, ensuring the others couldn't hear. Does anything about this feel off to you? She asked. Not just the watchers in the woods, but Connor's story too? What do you mean? The timing is convenient, don't you think? Last night, we all tell creepy stories around the campfire. And today, Connor reveals we're staying in a cabin with a history of disappearances. I considered this. You think he made it up? To scare us? Maybe, she shrugged. Or maybe there's some truth mixed with exaggeration. It just seems orchestrated somehow. Her observation resonated with the unease I'd been feeling. There was something performative about Connor's revelation, as if he'd been waiting for the right moment to share it. "Let's keep our eyes open," I suggested. "Not just for watchers in the woods, but for inconsistencies in Connor's story, too." By mid-afternoon, we had transformed the cabin into something resembling a secure outpost. Furniture was positioned to block the windows. Potential weapons were placed strategically throughout the space, and we had established a rotation for two-person watches rather than the single-person system from the previous night. As the day progressed, a strange calm settled over our group. The initial panic had given way to purposeful preparation, and with each hour that passed without incident, some of the tension began to dissipate. Connor prepared a hearty stew using some of our provisions, and we ate together in what might almost have been described as companionable silence. After dinner, as twilight descended on the forest, Connor retrieved a metal box from his pack. "I think there's something you should see," he said, placing it on the table. He opened the box to reveal a stack of thin notebooks journals, I realized. "These belong to my grandfather," Connor explained. "They're his research notes from the isolation experiments, including observations about the subjects who stayed here." "Why show us these now?" Eliza asked suspiciously. "Because there might be information here that could help us understand what's happening," Connor replied. "My grandfather was methodical. He documented everything, not just his formal research, but his personal observations, too. We each took a journal, leafing through pages filled with neat, precise handwriting. Most contained exactly what Connor had described: detailed notes on isolation experiments, observations of subject behavior, theoretical frameworks about solitude's psychological impact. But in one of the later journals, the one I happened to select, the tone changed. The entries became more personal, more troubled. Walter Walsh had begun experiencing the same phenomena he documented in his subjects: the sensation of being watched, unexplained sounds at night, objects move from where he'd left them. One passage in particular caught my attention. October 12, 1973. The incident with Keller continues to trouble me. The official conclusion of misadventure seems increasingly inadequate. I have now documented 17 distinct patterns of unusual phenomena at the cabin, phenomena that Keller described in his final journals: the tapping at night, the sense of observation, the movement at the periphery of vision. Most disturbing is my growing conviction that these are not psychological effects of isolation, as I initially theorized. There is an external element at work here, something I have yet to identify. The local rangers dismiss my concerns, attribute my observations to wildlife or the natural sounds of the forest. But animals do not rearrange a person's belongings in their absence. Animals do not tap in patterns of three. I must consider the possibility that human agents are responsible. The cabin's remote location would make it an ideal outpost for illegal activity smuggling, perhaps, given the proximity to the Canadian border. If Keller stumbled upon such an operation, it would explain his disappearance. I looked up from the journal, finding the others similarly engrossed in their readings. "Listen to this," Sasha said, reading from her journal. "April 1974. Third encounter with the Watchers today. They no longer retreat when observed." The man in the red jacket stood at the clearing's edge for nearly 10 minutes, making no attempt to conceal himself. When I raised my hand in greeting, he mimicked the gesture precisely, down to the angle of my fingers. This level of observational detail suggests prolonged surveillance. "Red jacket," Marcus repeated, "like what we saw on the trail." "Here's something else," Eliza added, flipping to a marked page in her journal. "September 1975. Discovered what appears to be a camp approximately 2 miles northeast of the cabin. Recently, abandoned fire pit, primitive lean-to shelter, several unusual arrangements of animal bones and forest materials, not consistent with standard camping practices. When I returned the next day with photography equipment, the entire site had been cleared away, with no evidence it had ever existed." "My grandfather never mentioned any of this to me," Connor said, sounding genuinely confused. "He always described his research here as successful but uneventful." "Maybe he was protecting you," I suggested. "Or maybe he was afraid of sounding crazy." "There's more," Eliza continued, her voice taking on an urgent quality. I am now convinced that what we are dealing with is a previously undocumented human community, one that has adapted to life in these remote mountains through extreme isolation from broader society. Their behavior suggests a complex social structure and territorial awareness. They observe, but rarely interfere, except when their boundaries are threatened. A community? Sasha echoed. Like mountain people? Some kind of cult? It would explain a lot, Marcus said thoughtfully. The footprints from multiple people, the deliberate signs left for us to find, the systematic observation. But why would they care about this cabin? I asked. Why not just avoid it? Connor had been unusually quiet, staring at the journal in his hands. I think I know, he said finally, his voice strained. According to this entry, my grandfather believed the cabin was built on land this group considered sacred or significant. The clearing itself might be important to them. So all these years, all these disappearances, it's been these people taking trespassers? Sasha asked. Not exactly taking, Connor corrected, reading from his journal. I believe what we have misinterpreted as disappearances may in fact be a form of assimilation. Keller's final journal entry. They're coming to collect me tonight. They say I'm one of them now. Suggests not abduction, but recruitment or adoption. A heavy silence fell over the cabin as we absorbed this theory. Outside, darkness had completely enveloped the forest. The lantern light created a small bubble of illumination that suddenly seemed terribly fragile against the vast night beyond our walls. So what do they want with us? Marcus finally asked. To recruit us too? Not all of us, Eliza said quietly. If the pattern holds 4 disappearances, 4 of us, besides Connor, they're only interested in one. We all instinctively looked at Connor, who raised his hands defensively. I swear I didn't know about any of this. These journals were just family heirlooms to me. I never read them before tonight. But you brought us here, Sasha pressed. 5 people, just like every other time. That was a coincidence, Connor insisted. I invited friends for a camping trip, people I thought would enjoy the wilderness. There was no agenda. His desperation seemed genuine, but doubt had firmly taken root. Everything about our situation had shifted, recontextualizing even innocent actions with sinister potential. We need to stay together, I said firmly. No one goes anywhere alone, not to gather firewood, not to check the spring, not even to use the outhouse. We buddy up for everything. Everyone nodded in agreement. With the revelation of a potential human threat, our strategy shifted from passive defense to active vigilance. We established clearer sightlines by rearranging furniture, created noise traps near potential entry points, and agreed to maintain 2-person watches through the night. As Eliza and I took the first watch, sitting by the window with a clear view of the clearing, she spoke softly to avoid waking the others who were attempting to rest. Do you believe Connor? She asked. That he didn't know about any of this? I considered the question carefully. I want to, but there are too many coincidences. 5 people at the cabin. The campfire stories last night setting the perfect mood for today's revelation. The way he dismissed our concerns until we found concrete evidence. Yet he seems genuinely shocked by some of the journal entries, Eliza observed. If he's acting, he's very good at it. Maybe he doesn't know everything, I suggested. Maybe he knows something is wrong with this place, but not the full extent of it. Eliza nodded slowly. That would explain the night watch he established yesterday, before any of us saw the watcher. Our conversation was interrupted by a sound that made us both freeze, now familiar tapping on the cabin wall. 3 distinct knocks, a pause, then 3 more. Coming from the east wall, just as I'd heard the previous night. They're here, Eliza whispered. We moved silently to wake the others, maintaining our agreement not to face anything alone. Within moments, all 5 of us were alert, positioned at different windows to monitor the clearing around the cabin. I see someone, Marcus whispered urgently. At the edge of the trees, not woo people, just standing there. I shifted position to look where he was pointing. In the faint moonlight filtering through the clouds, I could make out dark silhouettes at the forest's edge. They made no attempt to hide, standing motionless, watching the cabin. There's more, Sasha breathed from her position. 3 on this side. I count at least 7 individuals, Connor said, his voice tight with tension. They've surrounded the clearing. As we watched, one figure detached from the group, moving forward into the moonlight. It was a man, tall and lean, wearing what appeared to be hand-sewn clothing of leather and rough fabric. Most distinctively, he wore a faded red jacket, the same red flash we'd seen on the trail. He stopped halfway between the forest and the cabin, raised his hand in that same deliberate gesture I'd seen the night before, and called out in a voice that carried clearly through the night, "Walter Walsh. We have come to speak with Walter Walsh, Connor's grandfather. The man who had built this cabin over 50 years ago. The man who was, presumably, long dead." The man in the red jacket waited, perfectly still, hand still raised. When no response came, he called again, his voice taking on an edge of impatience. "Walter Walsh, you will answer. This is the appointed time." Connor looked at us, his face pale in the dim light. "What do we do? They're asking for my grandfather, who died 15 years ago." "Don't respond," Eliza advised. "We don't know what they want or what triggering the wrong response might do. But we can't just ignore them," Sasha argued. "They've clearly been planning this encounter. If we don't respond, they might take more direct action." As we debated, the man in the red jacket lowered his hand and turned back toward the forest. The other figures began to retreat as well, melting into the darkness between the trees. "They're leaving," Marcus said with obvious relief. "No," Connor replied grimly. "They're not leaving. They're preparing." "For what?" I asked. Connor's expression was grim as he double-checked the cabin's locks and barricades. "I don't know, but I think we're about to find out." Part 8. The night stretched endlessly as we maintained our vigil, watching for any movement from the forest. The figures had disappeared, but none of us believed they had truly left. The tapping continued intermittent lawways in sets of 3, coming from different walls each time, as if testing our responses or communicating in some code we couldn't decipher. Around 3 a.m., exhaustion began to take its toll. Despite the tension, Sasha had dozed off in her chair, while Marcus fought to keep his eyes open. Only Connor seemed fully alert, moving between windows with quiet determination, checking and rechecking our makeshift defenses. "You should rest," I told Eliza, who had been awake as long as I had. "I'll wake you if anything changes." She shook her head stubbornly. "I don't trust the situation. Or Connor. You still think he knew more than he's telling us?" "I think," she said carefully, "that his reactions to the journals were too perfect. Like he was performing surprise rather than experiencing it. I considered this. Connor's shock had seemed genuine to me, but Eliza's instincts were often sharper than mine. "What would be the point?" I asked softly. "If he is involved somehow, what does he gain by bringing us here?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But there's something else bothering me. Did you notice how the journals conveniently explain everything we've experienced? The watchers, the tapping, the symbolsets all laid out too neatly." Before I could respond, a new sound cut through the cabina low, melodic humming from outside, followed by what sounded like singing in a language I didn't recognize. The haunting tune rose and fell, carried on the night air. Connor rushed to the window. "They're back," he whispered urgently. We joined him, peering through the narrow gap in the shutters. In the clearing, illuminated by moonlight, stood at least a dozen figures arranged in a semicircle. They wore clothing similar to the man in the red jacket hand, crafted from leather and rough fabric, adorned with what looked like small bones and feathers. Their faces were obscured by the darkness and distance, but their posture was unmistakably attentive, focused entirely on the cabin. In the center of their formation stood a woman. Unlike the others, she wore what appeared to be a modern hiking jacket, though it was weathered and patched. Her gray hair hung in a long braid over one shoulder. She was the source of the singing, her arms raised as her voice carried the strange melody through the night. As the song ended, she lowered her arms and stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice was clear, and surprisingly normal, the voice of an elderly woman, not the mysterious entity we had feared. "We know you are not Walter," she called, "but you are of his blood. We have waited for this night, for the 5th party of 5, for the completion of the cycle." Connor tensed beside me. "She's talking about me," he whispered. "How does she know I'm related to my grandfather?" The journals, Eliza reminded us. If they've been watching the cabin for decades, they'd know who comes and goes. They'd have seen your grandfather, maybe your father, and now you. The woman outside continued. One must remain, one must join, as it has been 4 times before, as it will be tonight. This is the agreement Walter made with us. Agreement? Marcus echoed, fully awake now. What agreement? Connor shook his head, bewilderment evident in his expression. I have no idea what she's talking about. My grandfather was a researcher, not someone who made deals with. Whoever these people are, the choice is yours. The woman called out. Send one to us freely, and the others will leave unharmed. Refuse, and we will take one by force. This is the agreement. This is the way it has always been. Sasha gripped my arm tightly. They're saying exactly what we feared they want one of us. But why? I asked. What do they want with us? To join them, Connor said quietly. Like my grandfather's journal suggested. Not abduction, but recruitment. This is insane, Marcus hissed. We're not giving anyone to these people. Of course not, I agreed. Connor moved to the cabin door, his hand hovering over the lock. I should talk to them, find out exactly what they want. Maybe I can negotiate. Are you crazy? Eliza grabbed his arm. You open that door, and they'll rush us. They've had plenty of opportunities to force their way in, Connor argued. They could have broken the windows, come down the chimney, attacked while we were on the trail. But they haven't. They're following some kind of protocol, some ritual. I want to understand what it is. It's too dangerous, Sasha insisted. More dangerous than waiting for them to make the first move? Connor challenged. We're trapped here until morning. I'd rather gather information than sit in terrified ignorance. After heated, whispered debate, we reluctantly agreed to let Connor speak with the woman, but only through a small window opening, with the door remaining securely locked. Connor approached the window nearest to where the woman stood. He opened the shutter a few inches, keeping his body positioned to block any attempt to reach through. Who are you? He called out. What do you want with us? The woman moved closer, though she remained a good 15 feet from the cabin. In the moonlight, I could now see her face more clearly weathered by years outdoors, deeply lined but with bright, alert eyes that reflected the moonlight. We are the caretakers, she replied. We have watched over this mountain for generations. Your grandfather understood our purpose. He made an agreement with us. What agreement? Connor pressed. Safe passage, she said simply. We allowed him to build here, on our sacred ground, in exchange for knowledge, for new blood. Every generation, he would bring 5. One would remain with us, carrying their knowledge and skills to strengthen our community. That's absurd, Connor said. My grandfather was a researcher, a professor. He wouldn't trade human beings. The woman tilted her head, studying Connor through the window. Yet here you are, the 5th group of 5, as was agreed. I came here because this is my family's cabin, Connor insisted. I didn't know anything about any agreement. Knowledge passes in many ways, the woman replied cryptically. Through blood, through dreams, through calling. You felt that time had come, so you gathered 4 others. The pattern completes itself. Connor looked genuinely shaken. I don't believe you. Show me proof that my grandfather made this agreement. The woman reached into a pouch at her waist and removed something small. She approached the window, stopping just close enough for Connor to see what she held. A university ID card, yellowed with age but still legible. Walter Walsh, Department of Psychology. He gave this freely, she said, as a token of his word. Each time something is given, each time someone remains. Connor stared at the ID card, his face pale. Where did you get that? From Walter himself, she replied. As I received tokens from each who came after. The hiker gave his compass, the writer her pendant, the young man his watch. Items belonging to the people who had disappeared over the years, tangible proof that these caretakers had indeed been involved in their vanishing. What happened to them? Connor asked, his voice barely steady. The people who remained. They became caretakers, the woman said, as if it were obvious. They learned our ways, shared their knowledge, strengthened our community. They live with us still. except for Walter, who passed beyond 7 winters ago. My grandfather died 15 years ago, Connor had said earlier. The timeline didn't match. My grandfather died 15 years ago, Connor said, echoing my thought. Not 7. The woman smiled slightly. The man who left this mountain died perhaps 15 years ago, but Walter remained with us for many more years. He came to us willingly when his time in your world was complete. A chill ran through me at her words. Was she suggesting Walter Walsh had faked his death only to come live in the mountains with this mysterious group? I don't believe you, Connor said again, but his voice lacked conviction. Belief is not required, the woman replied calmly. Only compliance. One must remain. You will choose, or we will choose for you. And if we refuse? Connor challenged. If we fight? The woman's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted, a subtle tension that communicated more threat than any overt gesture could have. Then we will take one by force, and the agreement will be broken. The protection it offers will end, for all who come to this mountain in the future. Connor closed the shutter abruptly and turned to face us, his expression troubled. You don't actually believe any of this, do you? Marcus demanded. That your grandfather made some deal with these mountain people? I don't know what to believe, Connor admitted. But she had his ID. She knew about him, about the other disappearances, and the things she said about him staying with them. My grandfather's death was unusual. Nobody was ever found. The family was told he went hiking and must have fallen, but this is crazy, Sasha interrupted. Even if there was some kind of agreement, it doesn't bind us. We're not giving anyone to these people. Of course not, Connor agreed quickly. But we need to find a way out of this situation. They outnumber us. They know these woods better than we do, and they've made it clear they'll use force if necessary. So what's your suggestion? Eliza asked, skepticism evident in her tone. We stall, Connor replied. Keep them talking until dawn. My uncle will arrive at the trailhead around 9 a.m. If we're not there, he'll come up to check on us. He's an experienced hunter, and he'll be armed. That's assuming he makes it here, I pointed out. If these people control the mountain as thoroughly as they claim, they could intercept him. It's still our best hope, Connor insisted. We just need to hold out until morning. With reluctant agreement, we settled on Connor's plan. He would continue to engage the woman in conversation, extracting as much information as possible while delaying any definitive response to her demand. The rest of us would maintain our vigil at the windows, watching for any sign that the caretakers were attempting to breach our defenses. Connor returned to the window and reopened the shutter. The woman waited patiently, exactly where he'd left her. We need time to discuss this, he told her. This is all new information to us. Discussion changes nothing, she replied. The agreement stands. Tell me more about my grandfather, Connor said, deliberately changing the subject. You said he stayed with you. Why would he do that? The woman considered him for a moment, then nodded slightly, as if deciding to indulge his question. Walter came to study isolation, she said. But he discovered community instead. He learned our ways, our understanding of the mountain, our connection to this place. He recognized the wisdom in our separation from the corrupting influences of the outside world. And the others? Connor pressed. The hiker, the writer, the young man. Did they also join willingly? Something flickered across the woman's face, discomfort, perhaps. Some resisted at first, but all came to understand. In time, all found their place among us. That doesn't sound like willing recruitment, Connor observed. It sounds like captivity until Stockholm Syndrome sets in. The woman's expression hardened. You speak of things you do not understand. Our way of life preserves knowledge and traditions that your world has forgotten. We offer sanctuary from the chaos and destruction your civilization perpetuates. Many would consider it a gift, not a punishment. As Connor continued to engage the woman, I scanned the forest edge carefully, noting the positions of the other caretakers. They remained in their semicircle, watching silently. But something about their formation had changed. They seemed to be slowly spreading out, creating a wider perimeter around the cabin. I motioned to Eliza, drawing her attention to the movement. She nodded grimly, recognizing the tactical significance. They were positioning themselves for something. "Connor," I called softly, not wanting my voice to carry outside. "They're spreading out around the cabin." He glanced at me briefly, then returned his attention to the woman. "What exactly would happen to the person who remains with you?" he asked, his voice louder now. "Buying time while we assess the new threat." "They would be welcomed," the woman replied. "Taught our ways, given a place within our community according to their skills and abilities. In time, they would understand the privilege of being chosen." "And if they wanted to leave?" Connor challenged. "Would they be free to go?" Again, that flicker of discomfort crossed her face. "Few wish to leave once they truly understand our purpose. Those who cannot adapt are helped to find acceptance." Her euphemistic language sent a chill through me. "Help to find acceptance" sounded distinctly sinister. While Connor continued this verbal sparring, Marcus moved to my side. "I think I know what they're doing," he whispered, indicating the spreading caretakers. "Classic hunting technique. They're positioning to cut off escape routes. If we make a run for it, they'll have people in position to intercept no matter which direction we choose." "We're not planning to run," I reminded him. "Maybe we should be," he replied grimly. "I don't think waiting for Connor's uncle is a great strategy. If these people have been operating up here for generations, they'll have protocols for dealing with search parties." He had a point. We were relying heavily on a rescue that might never materialize. "So what's your suggestion?" I asked. "We create a diversion," Marcus said. "Something big enough to disrupt their formation. Then we make a run for it, together, down the trail. We know the way back to the trailhead, and we have flashlights. Even at night, we have a chance if we stick together and move fast." I considered his plan. It was risky, but perhaps less risky than remaining passive until dawn, especially if the caretakers were preparing for their own action. Before I could respond, Sasha called out from her position, "They're moving!" I spun to look where she was pointing. 3 of the caretakers had detached from the group and were approaching the cabin from the side, moving quickly and purposefully. "Connor," Eliza called urgently. "We've got movement." Connor broke off his conversation with the woman abruptly. "What's happening?" "I think they're tired of waiting for our answer," I said, as the 3 figures reached the cabin wall and began examining it methodically. "They're looking for a way in." The woman still stood calmly in front of the cabin, watching Connor through the window. "You have had time enough," she said. "A decision must be made. One remains, or one is taken. Those are the only options." "We need more time," Connor insisted, a note of desperation entering his voice. "Time is a luxury you have exhausted," she replied. "Choose now, or we choose for you." A sharp crack from the rear of the cabin made us all jump. The sound of splintering wood was unmistakable. They were breaking in. "The back door!" Marcus shouted, already moving to intercept. Chaos erupted as we scrambled to defend the breach. The flimsy back door, more a service entrance than a proper exit, was giving way under the systematic assault of what sounded like an axe or similar tool. Marcus and I braced ourselves against it, feeling the impact of each blow reverberating through the wood. "We need to barricade this stronger," I urged. "Help me move the cabinet." Connor and Eliza rushed to assist, dragging a heavy storage cabinet across the floor to reinforce the door. The blows paused briefly as our attackers assessed this new obstacle, then resumed with even greater force, now directed at the wall beside the door, a weaker point in the cabin structure. "They're going to get in," Sasha said, her voice tight with fear. "We need another plan." "Marcus's diversion," I suggested urgently. "We need to create enough chaos to break their formation, then make a run for it together." "What kind of diversion?" Connor asked, his eyes darting around the cabin as if seeking inspiration. "Fire," Eliza said suddenly. "Not the cabin we'd trap ourselves. But if we could create some kind of firebomb, throw it outside to scatter them." "The lantern oil?" Connor realized. "And my whiskey. We could make Molotov cocktails." The wood beside the door splintered, a small hole appearing through which I glimpsed movement outside. We were out of time. Working with frantic speed, Connor prepared 2 makeshift incendiary devices whiskey bottles filled with a mixture of alcohol and lantern oil, strips of cloth serving as wicks. While he worked, The rest of us gathered our most essential gear: flashlights, water bottles, keys to the SUV, waiting at the trailhead. The plan coalesced quickly. Connor would throw the first cocktail from the front window, creating a diversion that would hopefully draw attention away from the breaching attempt at the back. In the confusion, we would exit through the front door, running together toward the trail. A second cocktail would be carried as backup, deployable if we needed another diversion during our escape. With everyone in position, Connor lit the first wick. "Ready?" he asked, his face illuminated by the flickering flame. We nodded, tensed for action. "Now!" Connor shouted, flinging open the front shutter and hurling the flaming bottle into the clearing. The explosion of fire was immediate and dramatic, a burst of orange flame that illuminated the night and sent the waiting caretakers scattering. In the confusion, Connor pulled open the front door, and we burst out of the cabin as a group, running full tilt toward the trail. The elderly woman's voice rose above the chaos, calling out in that strange language. Figures moved in the darkness, converging on our position with alarming speed. The caretakers were recovering from their surprise much faster than we'd hoped. "Keep together!" I shouted as we reached the tree line, the trail just visible in the moonlight. "Don't separate!" We ran as one unit, the sound of pursuit close behind us. The trail descended steeply here, forcing us to slow our pace to avoid tumbling down the mountainside. Our flashlights bobbed wildly, creating disorienting patterns of light and shadow that made the forest seem to shift and move around us. The sound of running feet behind us grew closer. I glanced back to see multiple figures gaining ground, their movement through the forest unnervingly swift and sure, like people intimately familiar with every root and rock. "They're catching up!" Sasha gasped, her breath coming in short bursts. "The second cocktail," Marcus reminded Connor. "Use it now." Connor pulled the second bottle from his pack, fumbling with matches as we continued our headlong flight. The wick caught, flaring in the darkness. He turned, still running, and hurled it behind us. The explosion was like the first sudden burst of flame that illuminated the forest in stark relief. For a moment, I saw our pursuers clearly. Men and women of various ages, dressed in that strange hybrid of handmade and scavenged clothing. Their faces painted with dark patterns that made them nearly invisible in the forest shadows. The fire created momentary confusion, but not enough. They split into two groups, some dealing with the flames, while others continued the pursuit, barely breaking stride. "They know these woods too well," Eliza panted. "We can't outrun them." She was right. Despite our desperate pace, the sound of pursuit grew ever closer. They were hurting us, I realized, not trying to catch us directly, but steering our flight, forcing us to keep to the trail where our path was predictable. "We need to leave the trail," I decided abruptly. "Go cross-country. It's riskier, but it might break their tracking pattern." "Too dangerous in the dark," Connor objected. "We could fall, get separated." "We don't have a choice," I interrupted. "They're going to catch us if we stay on the trail." After a moment's hesitation, Connor nodded. "All right. Next clearing we reach, we break right into the trees. Everyone stay together no matter what." The clearing appeared about a minute later, a small break in the forest where the moonlight illuminated a patch of open ground. As one, we veered sharply right, plunging into the dense underbrush and trees beyond. The change in pursuit was immediate. Confused shouts echoed behind us as the caretakers temporarily lost our trail. We pushed forward, ignoring scratching branches and treacherous footing, driven by the knowledge that our advantage would be brief. "Keep moving," Connor urged in a harsh whisper. "They'll fan out to search. We need distance." We pressed on through the darkness, guided only by Connor's sense of direction and the occasional glimpse of moonlight through the canopy. The sounds of pursuit grew more distant, then more diffuse, as the caretakers spread out to search for our new path. After what felt like an eternity of stumbling through the forest, Connor called a halt in a small depression sheltered by fallen logs. We collapsed, gasping for breath, muscles burning from the sustained flight. "Did we lose them?" Sasha asked between breaths. "Temporarily," Connor replied, listening intently to the night sounds around us. "But they know these woods. They'll find our trail eventually." "So what now?" Marcus demanded. "We can't keep running all night." Connor checked his watch, the face dimly illuminated by moonlight. It's almost 5 a.m., dawn in about an hour. If we can evade them until daylight, we have a better chance of finding our way back to the trailhead. Unless they've already stationed people there, Eliza pointed out. They seem to anticipate our moves pretty well so far. A troubling thought occurred to me. Connor, I said slowly, how exactly does your uncle know to check on us tomorrow? Did you arrange that before we left? Or is it just a standing procedure for when people use the cabin? Connor hesitated just a fraction too long. It's standard practice. My family always has someone check in after the first night, especially with guests who aren't experienced in the backcountry. Eliza caught my eye, clearly sharing my suspicion. And your uncle knows exactly where the cabin is, even though it's not on any trail maps, supposedly? Of course, Connor replied, a defensive edge entering his voice. He's been coming here for years. Just like the caretakers have, I observed. Connor, is there any chance your uncle is connected to them? That this whole setup, the cabin, the agreement, the regular disappearance, involves your entire family, not just your grandfather? That's ridiculous, Connor snapped, but his expression in the dim light was uncertain. My family are normal people, academics, professionals, not some mountain cult. Yet your grandfather supposedly joined them, Eliza pressed. And now we're in a situation where you've brought 4 people to a remote cabin, just like the previous incidents. Pretty big coincidence, don't you think? Connor stood abruptly. I don't have to listen to this. I'm trying to help us escape. And you're accusing me of being part of some conspiracy? Then explain the pattern, I insisted. 4 previous groups of 5, 4 disappearances, and now us the 5th group, right on schedule. Connor's face contorted with a mix of anger and what looked disturbingly like guilt.
I didn't know about any agreement. I had dreams about the cabin.
About bringing friends here. It felt important, like something I needed to do. His admission hung in the air between us, ominous in its implications. Dreams, Eliza repeated flatly. Like the woman said, knowledge passes through blood, through dreams. I thought they were just stress dreams, Connor insisted. I've been under a lot of pressure at work, needed a vacation. The cabin seemed like the perfect getaway. With 4 friends, Marcus added, specifically 4. Before Connor could respond, a sound cut through the night, the same 3-tap pattern we'd heard on the cabin walls, but now it came from the darkness surrounding our hiding place. Tap, tap, tap. Then again, from a different direction. Tap, tap, tap. They found us, Sasha whispered, terror evident in her voice. The tapping continued, coming from multiple directions now, closing in like an auditory net. We need to move, Connor urged. Now, before they surround us completely. We rose, muscles protesting after the brief rest, and began moving again more carefully now, trying to balance speed with stealth. But the tapping followed, always maintaining the same distance, neither closing in nor falling behind. They're hurting us again, I realized, driving us in a specific direction. But where? Eliza asked. Not back to the cabin. As if in answer, the forest suddenly opened up before us, revealing a small clearing dominated by a peculiar structuria circle of standing stones, each about waist high, surrounding a central flat stone that resembled an altar. The entire arrangement was ancient, weathered by countless seasons, yet deliberately maintained, free of the encroaching forest growth. On the far side of the stone circle stood the woman who had spoken to us at the cabin. Beside her was a man in a red jacket, the figure we'd glimpsed watching us on the trail and from the forest edge. The sacred ground, Connor whispered, recognition and fear mingling in his voice. This is what my grandfather's journal meant, not the cabin clearing this place. The woman stepped forward, moonlight illuminating her lined face. You have run your course, she said simply. Now you must choose. One remains, or one is taken. We huddled together at the edge of the clearing, the sounds of the caretakers gathering behind us, blocking any retreat. We were cornered, exhausted, and out of options. What happens now? I asked Connor quietly. His face was pale in the moonlight, his expression a mixture of fear and resignation. I think, he said slowly, I'm about to find out what my grandfather agreed to all those years ago. Part 9. The stone circle stood before us, ancient and imposing in the pre-dawn light. Around its perimeter, the caretakers had gathered, silent witnesses to whatever was about to unfold. Their faces remained partially obscured by the shadows of early morning, but I could feel their eyes on us watching, waiting, expecting. We're not doing this, Marcus declared, his voice pitched low but firm. Whatever sick ritual you've got planned, we're not participating. The elderly woman regarded him with something approaching pity. Participation is not optional, she said. It never has been. The only choice is how it happens freely given or forcibly taken. What exactly does remaining entail? Eliza asked, her analytical mind still seeking information, options, a way out. What do you do with the person who stays? The woman gestured to the man in the red jacket, who stepped forward into better light. He was younger than I'd initially thought, perhaps in his 30s, with a weathered face but bright, intelligent eyes. When he spoke, his accent was educated, with only the slightest hint of something else beneath it, something older, more regional. I was the last to join, he said. 10 years ago. I came with friends like you. I was chosen to remain. Chosen by whom? Sasha asked. By my companions, he replied. They decided I would be the one. A sacrifice, they called it then. I see it differently now. And what happens to the person who remains? Connor pressed, echoing Eliza's question. The man in red looked to the older woman, who nodded slightly. You are bonded to the mountain, he explained, through a ceremony as old as these stones. Your old life ends. A new one begins, here, with the caretakers. Bonded, I asked. What does that mean exactly? It means, the woman interjected, that you become one with this place, tied to it, protected by it, serving as its guardian. The bond prevents departure physically, spiritually. This mountain becomes your world, forever. Her words sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the morning air. You're talking about imprisonment, I said. I'm talking about transformation, she corrected. A new purpose, a life of meaning and connection, away from the corruption and emptiness of the world below. And if the person tries to leave? Eliza challenged. The woman's expression hardened. The bond prevents it. Those who fight against it suffer. The mountain reclaims what is given to it, one way or another. The implications were clear and horrifying. This wasn't recruitment, it was a life sentence enforced by methods I didn't want to imagine. So the 4 who disappeared, Connor said slowly. They're all still here, living among you? All but one, the man in red confirmed. The writer couldn't accept her new life. She fought the bond too strongly. And what happened to her? Sasha asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. The man lowered his eyes. The mountain reclaimed her. We buried what remained at the stone table. He nodded toward the altar, like slab at the center of the circle. Silence fell as we absorbed this grim revelation. The woman who had come to write in solitude, confined against her will until she broke or died trying to escape. It was monstrous. Why? I demanded. Why do you need to take people like this? What possible purpose does it serve? Renewal, the woman said simply. Our community requires new blood, new knowledge from the world below. Without it, we would grow stagnant, weaken, eventually die out. And the mountain requires its tributia life given in exchange for the lives it supports. So, this is about breeding stock, Marcus said disgustedly. Forcing people to join your cult to diversify your gene pool. The woman's eyes flashed with anger at his crude characterization. It is about survival, about maintaining a way of life that has existed in these mountains since before your cities were built. We take only what we need from every 5, once every generation. And my grandfather agreed to this? Connor asked, disbelief evident in his voice. He volunteered to supply you with victims? He understood the necessity, the woman replied. As a scientist, he recognized the value of our isolated community. human society that had evolved separately from modern influence. He documented our ways, our knowledge, our connection to this place. Her voice softened, and when his time in your world was complete, he returned to us, bringing all he had learned. Connor shook his head. I still don't believe it. My grandfather was a good man. He wouldn't have sacrificed others just for his research. Yet here you are, the woman observed. The fifth party of 5, drawn by dreams, by blood memory, by the mountain's call. The pattern completes itself, with or without conscious intention. Dawn was breaking now, the first rays of sunlight cresting the eastern ridge, illuminating the stone circle with golden light. The woman raised her arms, addressing the gathered caretakers in that strange language we'd heard before. They responded in kind, their voices rising in what sounded like a chant or prayer. It is time, she announced, returning to English. The choosing must happen at dawn. One must remain. You will decide among yourselves, or we will decide for you. And if we refuse, Eliza challenged, if we fight, then we will take one by force, the woman replied calmly. And the others will not leave this mountain alive. The agreement will be broken, and with it, the protection it offers your kind. What protection? Connor asked. For generations we have kept this mountain safe for those who visit it, the man in red explained. Guided lost hikers back to trails, prevented accidents, maintained balance with the other creatures who live here. Without the agreement, that protection ends. For everyone. So it's a threat, Marcus summarized. Sacrifice one of us, or you'll start killing hikers and campers. It is the way it has always been, the woman said, unmoved by his characterization. Long before your grandfather, before any of your kind came to this place, the mountain demands balance. The sun climbed higher, its light now fully illuminating the clearing. The caretakers had formed a complete circle around us, cutting off any possibility of escape. Beyond them, I could see more figures moving through the trees, dozens of them. An entire community gathered to witness the choosing. We need to discuss this, Connor said finally. Privately. The woman considered his request, then nodded. You have until the sun touches the center stone. Then we must proceed. She moved away, taking the man in red with her. They did not go far, just to the edge of the clearing, still within sight, but giving us the illusion of privacy. We need to make a run for it, Marcus whispered urgently as soon as they were out of earshot. All at once, different directions. Some of us might make it. And leave whoever they catch to this bonding ceremony? Sasha shook her head. I can't do that. We stay together, I agreed. Either all of us get out, or none of us do. But how? Eliza asked practically. They've got us completely surrounded. They know these woods better than we do, and we're exhausted from running all night. All eyes turned to Connor, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during this exchange. His face was pale, his expression troubled. Connor, I prompted, any ideas? He looked up, meeting each of our gazes in turn. I think, he began hesitantly, then seemed to gather his resolve. I think I should be the one to stay. What? Marcus exploded, though he kept his voice low. Are you insane? Listen to me, Connor insisted. I've been thinking about everything that's happened. The dreams that led me to organize this trip. The way I felt drawn to the cabin, even though I hadn't visited it in years. The fact that I'm Walter Walsh's grandson. What if this isn't coincidence? What if I really was meant to come back here? That's their manipulation talking, Eliza said firmly. They've been setting this up from the beginning, leaving those signs on the trail, watching the cabin, all of it designed to make us feel helpless and push us toward this exact moment. But what if there's more to it? Connor pressed. What if my grandfather really did make some kind of deal, and I don't know, the final payment? The completion of whatever he started? Even if that were true, I argued, it doesn't obligate you to sacrifice yourself. Your grandfather's choices aren't yours. Connor looked toward the stone circle, his expression distant. Maybe not. But I keep thinking about what they said about balance, about protection. What if there's some truth to it? What if people really will die if we break this agreement? That's a threat, Not a natural consequence, Marcus countered. They're trying to manipulate you, make you feel responsible for something that isn't your burden. Maybe, Connor conceded, but what's our alternative? Try to fight our way through dozens of them? Even if some of us make it to the trailhead, what then? Report that a community of mountain people tried to kidnap us as part of some ancient ritual. Who would believe that? He had a point, one I didn't want to acknowledge. The entire situation was so bizarre, so outside normal experience, that any attempt to explain it to authorities would likely be dismissed as a prank or delusion. There has to be another way, Sasha insisted, desperation edging into her voice. We can't just give up. The sun had risen higher, its light now approaching the central stone. Our time was running out. Wait, Eliza said suddenly. What about Connor's uncle? He's supposed to check on us this morning, right? If we can just stall long enough for him to arrive. Connor's expression fell. I'm not sure that would help, he admitted. If what they're saying is true, my family has been involved with the caretakers for generations. My uncle might be part of this too. Or he might not, I countered. Either way, he represents a change to the current scenario. A wild card these people haven't accounted for. It's worth trying, Marcus agreed. We just need to buy some time. Before we could develop this plan further, the woman approached again. The sun touches the stone, she announced. The time for choosing has come. I looked to the center of the circle, where, indeed, the sunlight had reached the edge of the central slab. Soon it would illuminate the entire stone, marking whatever deadline they had established. We need more time, Connor told her. This isn't a simple decision. It never is, she acknowledged. But the ceremony must proceed with the dawn. Who remains? Connor stepped forward. If someone must stay. No, Eliza interrupted sharply, grabbing his arm. We haven't agreed to this. We're still discussing our options. The woman's expression hardened. The time for discussion is past. The choosing must happen now. What if we proposed an alternative? I suggested quickly. A different kind of exchange? This caught her attention. What alternative could there be? The agreement is clear. Your goal is to bring new knowledge, new skills to your community, right? I pressed. What if we offered to return regularly, all of us, to share what we know? No one would have to remain permanently. The woman shook her head. The bond must be formed. The mountain requires its tribute. And what exactly is this bond? Eliza demanded. What does the ceremony entail? For the first time, the woman seemed hesitant. She exchanged glances with the man in the red jacket before responding. The chosen one drinks from the mountain spring, mixed with elements from the sacred stones. They speak the words of binding. They give blood to the stone table. Through these acts, they become tied to this place, unable to leave, protected by the mountain's power. So it's drugging, Marcus said flatly. You drug people and use psychological manipulation to convince them they can't leave. It is far more than that, the woman replied, affronted. The bond is real, physical. Those who try to break it suffer consequences beyond our control. Like what? Sasha challenged. Again, that hesitation. Sickness, disorientation, pain that increases with distance from the sacred ground. Eventually, if they persist, internal bleeding, organ failure, death. That sounds like poison, I observed. Something in this spring that creates physical dependency. The woman's eyes flashed. You reduce sacred mysteries to crude chemistry. The bond is spiritual as much as physical. It connects the chosen to the mountain itself, to powers your science cannot explain. While this exchange continued, I noticed Connor watching the tree line intently. Following his gaze, I caught a glimpse of movement, someone approaching through the forest. Not from the direction of the cabin, but from the trail leading to the outside world. Connor's uncle, right on schedule. Connor had noticed too. He shifted slightly, positioning himself to block the woman's view of the approaching figure. I have questions about this bond, he said loudly, drawing her attention. About my grandfather's involvement. Was he bonded too? Is that why he returned here? The distraction worked. The woman turned fully toward Connor, launching into an explanation of Walter Walsh's special relationship with the mountain and the caretakers. While she spoke, the figure at the forest edge came into clearer Viewa man in his 50s, dressed in practical hiking gear, carrying what looked like a hunting rifle slung over his shoulder. Eliza had spotted him too. She caught my eye, making a subtle gesture toward the newcomer. I nodded slightly, understanding her intent. If Connor's uncle was indeed coming to help, we needed to be ready to act when he made his move. The woman was still talking, explaining how Walter Walsh had documented the caretaker's traditional knowledge, combining it with his scientific understanding to enhance their healing practices and agricultural methods. He brought wisdom from your world, she said, and in return we shared wisdom from ours. A fair exchange that benefited both our communities. And now, you want one of us to continue that exchange, Connor prompted, keeping her engaged. Yes, she nodded. The cycle must continue. New blood, new knowledge, new strength for our people. While this conversation held the woman's attention, I scanned the caretakers surrounding us. Many had turned to watch the exchange between Connor and their leader, but a few had noticed the approaching figure. They shifted uneasily, some making subtle gestures to alert others. The man in the red jacket leaned in to whisper something to the woman. She listened, her expression changing from engagement to alarm. Turning, she finally spotted Connor's uncle emerging from the tree line. "Michael!" she called out, using what I assumed was the uncle's name. "You are early." The man Michael approached cautiously, his hand resting near, but not on his rifle. "Morning, Eleanor," he replied, his tone neutral but cautious. "Came to check on my nephew and his friends. Looks like I arrived at an interesting time." "The choosing ceremony," Eleanor explained, "has agreed." Michael's expression darkened. "We've discussed this, Eleanor. The old ways are ending. The council voted." Council? Voted? This exchange suggested a relationship far more complex than we had imagined. "The mountain does not recognize your council's vote," Eleanor replied sharply. "The agreement stands. One must remain." "No," Michael said firmly. "Not anymore. We found another way." The tension in the clearing had shifted palpably. The caretakers were no longer a unified foursome, had moved closer to Eleanor, while others seemed to align themselves with Michael. A division, I realized, within their community. "What's happening?" Marcus whispered. "Political disagreement, it seems," Eliza whispered back. "Not everyone agrees with the kidnapping approach." Michael approached our group, positioning himself slightly in front of us, facing Eleanor. "Connor," he said without turning, "take your friends and head down the trail. My truck is at the trailhead. Keys under the front seat." "They will not leave," Eleanor declared. "Not until the choosing is complete." "The choosing is over, Eleanor," Michael countered. "It ended with Walter. The agreement has been fulfilled." "The mountain requires its tribute," she insisted, her voice rising. "The mountain requires balance," Michael corrected. "And we found a new way to maintain it. Controlled access, protected lands, partnership with conservation authorities. The old methods are no longer necessary." I realized what we were witnessing, a generational conflict within the caretaker community. The old guard, represented by Eleanor, clinging to traditional practices, while a progressive faction led by Michael pushed for adaptation and change. "This is your doing," Eleanor accused Michael. "You and your modern ideas. Your connections to the world below. You weaken us." "I'm ensuring our survival," Michael replied calmly. "The world is changing, Eleanor. We can't hide in these mountains forever, taking people against their will. That path leads to discovery, to intervention by authorities, to the end of our way of life." The standoff continued, neither side willing to back down. Around the clearing, I noticed the caretakers shifting positions, forming smaller groups aligned with one leader or the other. The unified front had fractured, revealing internal conflicts that had clearly been brewing for some time. Connor stepped forward. "Uncle Mike," he said cautiously, "what exactly is going on here? Are you part of whatever this is?" Michael glanced at his nephew, regret evident in his expression. "It's complicated, Connor. Our family has had a relationship with the caretakers for generations. Your grandfather was the first to fully document their culture, their traditions. He became fascinated, eventually obsessed. When his health began to fail, he chose to spend his final years here, learning their ways. And the agreement? Connor pressed. The disappearances? Michael's expression darkened. A practice I've been trying to end for decades. The traditional belief holds that the mountain requires human tributone person from each party of 5 that stays at the sacred ground. In exchange, the mountain provides protection, resources, and spiritual connection. But you don't believe that, I observed. I believe the caretakers have valuable knowledge. Traditions worth preserving, Michael replied carefully. But I also believe that kidnapping people is wrong, regardless of the justification. I've been working within the community to find alternative ways to maintain their way of life without violating others' freedom. Eleanor had been listening with growing anger. Now she raised her voice, addressing the gathered caretakers in their native language. Some responded with evident agreement, while others shook their heads, moving to stand closer to Michael. You see, Michael said quietly, the community is divided, has been for years. The younger generation wants connection with the outside world, not isolation from it. They want to preserve their traditions while adapting to modern realities. And where do we fit into this conflict? Eliza asked. Leverage, Michael admitted. For Eleanor and the traditionalists, you represent the continuation of the old ways. One final tribute to satisfy the mountain's demands. For me and the progressives, you're a chance to demonstrate that we can interact with outsiders without resorting to coercion. The sun had fully illuminated the central stone now, bathing it in golden morning light. Eleanor pointed to it dramatically. The time has come, she declared. The stone awaits its tribute. The choosing must be completed. No, Eleanor, Michael said firmly. Not this time. She stared at him, her expression hardening into something like hatred. Then you have broken the agreement. The consequences will fall on all of us. If there are consequences, Michael replied calmly, we will face them together, as a community. But I will not allow another innocent person to be sacrificed to fear and superstition. Eleanor raised her arms, addressing her followers in that strange language, her voice rising with fervor. Those aligned with her, perhaps a third of the gathered, caretakers responded in kind, moving closer to her, forming a tight group. Go, Michael told us urgently. Now, while they're distracted, take the main trail down. Don't stop until you reach the trailhead. What about you? Connor asked, concern evident in his voice. I'll handle this, Michael assured him. This confrontation has been coming for years. It's time to resolve it, once and for all. Eleanor had finished her speech. Now she pointed directly at us, issuing what sounded like a command. Her followers tensed, preparing to move. Go! Michael shouted, unslinging his rifle and holding it not quite pointed at Eleanor's group, but ready. We didn't need further encouragement. As a single unit, we backed away toward the trail, then turned and began running. Behind us, voices rose in anger and argument, but no one pursued. The internal conflict had bought us the opportunity we needed. We ran down the trail, pushing our exhausted bodies to their limit, fueled by adrenaline and the desperate desire to put this nightmare behind us. The descent was faster than our ascent had been, gravity pulling us forward, the clear trail allowing us to maintain a steady pace. After about 20 minutes of hard running, we slowed to a more sustainable jog, then eventually to a fast walk. The sounds from the stone circle had long since faded, and there was no sign of pursuit. Do you think they'll come after us? Sasha asked between heavy breaths. I don't think so, Connor replied, glancing back up the trail. My uncle's intervention changed the dynamic completely. Eleanor's faction didn't seem to have enough support to act against him. Speaking of your uncle, Marcus began, his tone accusatory. Did you know about his connection to these caretakers? About your family's involvement with them? Connor shook his head emphatically. No. I knew the cabin had been in my family for generations, and that my grandfather spent time here for his research. But I had no idea about any agreement, any disappearances linked to my family. The dreams you mentioned, Eliza pressed. About bringing friends to the cabin. When did those start? Connor considered this. About 2 months ago. Recurring dreams where I'd see the cabin, feel an urgent need to return there. Sometimes I'd see Fessus not, clearly, but presences. 5 of them, including me. Right around the time you started organizing this trip, I observed. Yes, he acknowledged. I thought it was just stress, my subconscious suggesting a vacation. Now, he trailed off, looking troubled. Now you wonder if it was something else, Eliza finished for him. Some kind of influence or manipulation. The woman Eleanor said knowledge passes through blood, through dreams, Connor recalled. What if my grandfather's connection to this place somehow affected me? What if I was unwittingly continuing the pattern he established? It was a disturbing thought that Connor might have been an unconscious instrument in a plan set in motion decades ago, bringing us to this mountain not through conscious choice, but through inherited obligation. We can't know for sure, I said, trying to offer some comfort. And regardless of how we ended up here, what matters is that we're leaving together. All of us. We continued down the trail, each lost in our own thoughts, processing the bizarre events of the past 24 hours. The morning had fully bloomed now, sunlight filtering through the forest canopy, birds singing as if nothing unusual had happened in their domain. About half an hour from the trailhead, according to Connor's estimate, we heard the sound of someone coming up the trail toward us. We tensed, preparing for another confrontation, but it was Michael who appeared around the bend, his rifle once again slung over his shoulder. "Uncle Mike," Connor called out in relief. "Are you okay? What happened back there?" Michael approached, looking tired but satisfied. "It's over," he said simply. "For good this time. Eleanor and her followers have agreed to abide by the council's decision. No more tributes, no more enforced isolation. The caretakers will maintain their traditions, but engage with the outside world on their own terms." "Just like that?" Marcus asked skeptically. "After generations of kidnapping people, they suddenly agree to stop because you asked nicely?" Michael's expression was grim. "Not just because I asked, because they had no choice. The world is closing in on their sanctuary. Satellite mapping, increased tourism, climate researchers studying the mountain's ecosystem cessation is no longer viable. Adapt or be discovered and destroyed. Those were the options I presented." "And Eleanor accepted this?" Connor asked, clearly surprised. "She had little choice," Michael replied. "The majority of the community sided with me. Even many of her traditional allies recognized that the old ways were becoming too dangerous to maintain." "What about the people they've taken over the years?" Sasha asked. "The hiker, the rider, the others? Are they free to leave now?" Michael's expression sobered. "That's more complicated. The bond they speak of, it's not entirely superstition. The spring water used in their ceremony contains compounds found nowhere else on the mountain. Compounds that create a physical dependency when consumed regularly. So, it is a drug," I said, vindicated in my earlier suspicion. "In a sense," Michael nodded. "Though one unique to this ecosystem. My team I work with, a pharmaceutical research group, has been studying it for years. We're developing a treatment to break the dependency safely, but it's not ready yet." "Your team?" Eliza echoed. "You're saying a pharmaceutical company knows about these people? About what they've been doing?" "Not exactly," Michael clarified. "My research group knows about a unique compound found in a remote mountain spring. They don't know about the caretakers or their practices. I've kept those worlds separate, for everyone's protection. So all this time," Connor said slowly, "while people were being abducted, while my grandfather was apparently participating in this scheme, you were what? Studying the drug that keeps them trapped?" Michael sighed heavily. "It's not that simple, Connor. Your grandfather discovered the caretakers in the 1960s. By the time I became involved in the 1990s, the relationship between our family and their community was deeply established. I've been working from the inside to change their practices, to find a way to break the cycle while protecting their culture and knowledge. And using their sacred spring for pharmaceutical research in the meantime," Marcus added bitterly. "The compounds in that spring have potential applications for treating neurological disorders," Michael defended. "My work could help thousands of people. Yes, I've been studying it, but with the goal of ending the dependency it creates, not exploiting it." We fell silent, digesting this new information. The straightforward horror story of a mountain cult abducting innocent travelers had transformed into something more complex, a clash between tradition and modernity, exploitation and preservation, with moral ambiguities that defied simple judgment. "What happens now?" I finally asked. "You return to your lives," Michael said simply. "Forget what happened here if you can. The caretakers will adapt, find new ways to maintain their community without victimizing others. My research will continue, hopefully leading to treatments that can free those who wish to leave the mountain." "And you expect us to just walk away?" Sasha challenged. "Pretend none of this happened?" "What's the alternative?" Michael countered. "Report it to authorities? Tell them about a secretive mountain community that's been abducting people for generations? About magical bonds and sacred stones? At best, you'd be dismissed as delusional. At worst, you'd trigger an investigation that would destroy a unique cultural group that's managed to preserve pre-colonial traditions for centuries." He had a point, as uncomfortable as it was to acknowledge. The story was too bizarre, too far outside normal experience to be believable without evidence. And the evidence was up there, in a remote clearing accessible only by an unmarked trail, controlled by people who had been hiding their existence from the outside world for generations. "I'm not asking you to approve of what's happened," Michael added, his tone softening. "Just to understand that the situation is more complex than it appears, and that change is already happening. The old ways are ending. No one else will be taken against their will." We continued down the trail in uneasy silence, each processing what we'd learned, what we'd experienced. When we finally reached the trailhead and Michael's truck came into view, the relief was palpable, but tempered by lingering questions and concerns. As we loaded our gear into the truck, Connor pulled his uncle aside for a private conversation. They spoke intently for several minutes, Connor's expression cycling through anger, confusion, and finally a troubled acceptance. When they rejoined us, Connor looked drained but resolute. "My uncle has offered to drive us back to our car," he announced. "I think we should take him up on it." The drive was mostly silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts. When we reached our vehicle, still parked where we'd left it before beginning our ill-fated adventure, Michael rolled down his window. "I know you have no reason to trust me," he said, "but I give you my word. What happened to you won't happen to anyone else. The cycle is broken." With that, he drove away, leaving us standing in the parking lot with our packs and our lingering questions. "So, that's it?" Marcus asked incredulously. "We just go home and pretend this never happened? What choice do we have?" Connor replied, his voice heavy with resignation. "My uncle was right about one thing. No one would believe us. And even if they did, what would happen to the people up there? Not just Eleanor and her followers, but the ones who've been trapped by this bond, the ones who are trying to change things from within. It doesn't feel right," Sasha said quietly. "Just walking away." "No," Eliza agreed. "It doesn't. But I'm not sure there's a right answer here. Just less wrong ones." We loaded our gear into Connor's SUV and began the long drive down from the mountains, back toward the city and our normal lives. The forest thinned, giving way to scattered homes, then suburbs, then urban sprawl. With each mile, the events on the mountain seemed more distant, more dreamlike, harder to fully believe even though we had all experienced them together. That night, we gathered at Connor's apartment, drawn together by the shared experience that separated us from the normal world around us. None of us wanted to be alone with our thoughts, our memories, our lingering fears. "What happens now?" Marcus asked, echoing my earlier question to Michael. "To us, I mean. Do we just go back to our lives? Act like this was just a camping trip gone weird?" "I don't think we can," I admitted. "Not completely. What we experienced up there, it changes you, knowing something like that exists, that the world is stranger, more dangerous than most people realize, but also more wonder-filled," Eliza added thoughtfully. "Think about it, a community that's maintained its independence and traditions for centuries, right here in modern America. A spring with compounds unique enough to interest pharmaceutical researchers, sacred stones that predate European settlement. And people who've been kidnapped and forced to join this community," Sasha reminded her. "Let's not romanticize what they've done. No, Eliza agreed. But understanding isn't the same as excusing. And there is something fascinating about what we glimpsed, however horrific the methods. Connor had been unusually quiet throughout this discussion. Now he spoke up, his voice carrying a weight of responsibility. I've been thinking about what my uncle said about the bond, about the people who've been trapped on the mountain. He mentioned developing a treatment, but how long will that take? Years maybe, and in the meantime, those people remain captives, regardless of how the caretakers try to justify it. What are you suggesting? I asked, sensing he had more than just observations to offer. Connor took a deep breath. My uncle's research group has been studying the compound, but they don't know its source or purpose. What if we approach them directly? Provided samples, explained the situation, not the whole truth, but enough to accelerate their work? Wouldn't that risk exposing the caretakers? Marcus asked. Not if we're careful, Connor replied. We don't need to reveal their location or identity, just the nature of the dependency the compound creates. My background in chemistry would give us credibility, especially with my uncle's name as reference. It was a risky proposition, but one with merit. If we could help develop a treatment that would free those trapped on the mountain, perhaps we could balance the scales, somewhat turning our traumatic experience into something positive. I think we should consider it, I said slowly. Not rush into anything, but explore the possibility. See if we can help without causing more harm. Agreement rippled through our small group. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was action rather than passive acceptance. A way to process what had happened by channeling it towards something constructive. As the evening wore on, our conversation drifted to other topics. Moments of normalcy breaking through the extraordinary experience that had bound us together. But underneath, I knew we had all been changed by our time on the mountain. We had glimpsed a world hidden within our own, seen the darkness and complexity that lurks beneath the surface of everyday reality. And in that glimpse, we had lost something, the comfortable ignorance that allows most people to move through life believing they understand the world and their place in it. But we had gained something to a deeper appreciation for the mysteries that still exist in seemingly familiar places, and for the bonds formed when facing the unknown together. As I left Connor's apartment that night, I found myself looking up at the distant mountains, silhouetted against the night sky. Somewhere up there, the caretakers were continuing their ancient ways, adapting to changes forced upon them, guarding secrets most of the world would never know existed. And I wondered, how many other secrets were out there, waiting in forgotten corners and remote places? How many other stories remained untold, experiences that would strain credibility but happened nonetheless? How thin was the veneer of normality we construct around ourselves? And how easily might it be pierced by forces we neither understand nor control? These were questions without easy answers. But as I turned away from the mountains and headed home, I knew one thing with certainty. I would never look at a remote cabin, or a dense forest, or a winding trail in quite the same way again. The world had revealed itself as stranger, more dangerous, and more wonder-filled than I had ever imagined. And that knowledge, once gained, could never be unlearned. Part 10. The fire had burned low, reduced to glowing embers that cast just enough light to illuminate our faces in the darkness. For several moments after Connor finished his story, silence hung over our group, broken only by the occasional pop from the dying fire and the endless chorus of night insects. Jesus, Connor, Marcus finally said, his voice hushed. He seemed at a loss for words. Intense, Eliza finished for him. Did you ever go back? To the mountains, I mean? Connor shook his head, tossing another small log onto the embers. Sparks spiraled upward into the night sky. No, none of us did. But we did follow through on the plan to help with the research. My uncle's pharmaceutical team developed a treatment about a year later, something that could break the dependency on the compound without the severe withdrawal effects. Last I heard, several of the people who had been bonded to the mountain were able to leave successfully. Including the man in the red jacket? I asked. Him too, Connor nodded. Thomas Reed, the hiker who disappeared in 1984. He's living in Seattle now, adjusting to a world that changed dramatically during his 35 years on the mountain. Do you stay in touch with the others? Sasha asked. The friends who were with you that night? Connor's expression turned contemplative. We tried to stay close after everything that happened. For a while, that shared experience created a bond that was almost unbreakable. But eventually, the intensity faded. People moved away, started families, built new lives. We still check in with each other occasionally, but it's not the same. That seems to be how these things go, I observed. Intense shared experiences create powerful connections, but maintaining them over time and distance requires effort that often gets overwhelmed by daily life. Exactly, Connor agreed. Though I sometimes wonder if we deliberately drifted apart, as if maintaining those relationships meant keeping the memory of that night too vivid, too present. So, what happened with the caretakers? Marcus asked. Are they still up there doing their thing minus the kidnapping? As far as I know, yes, Connor replied. My uncle remained their connection to the outside world until he passed away 3 years ago. The younger generation has taken over leadership now, gradually integrating certain aspects of modern life while preserving their traditions. They've become something of an anthropological curiosity, a community that maintained near-complete isolation well into the 21st century. And they're just left alone? No investigation into the disappearances over the years? Eliza pressed. Connor sighed. That's the complicated part. Once people started leaving the mountain, questions inevitably arose. My uncle and I worked with an attorney to create a carefully constructed narrativa, voluntary spiritual community that became too controlling, preventing members from leaving through psychological manipulation rather than physical force. Close enough to the truth to be believable, vague enough to protect the community from the worst legal consequences. Some of the former recruits accepted financial settlements in exchange for non-disclosure agreements. Others simply wanted to move on with their lives without the complications of a public legal battle. It wasn't perfect justice, but it allowed those who had been victimized to receive some compensation while giving the caretakers time to reform from within. The fire crackled as we absorbed this morally ambiguous resolution. Like many real-world situations, there had been no clean, satisfying conclusion, just compromises and adaptations that allowed life to continue while addressing the worst harms. Do you ever wonder, Sasha asked after a moment, if the tapping and watching were entirely human? If there might have been something else involved, something connected to the mountain itself? Connor considered this. Sometimes, he admitted, especially when I remember how precisely coordinated their movements were that night, how they seemed to appear and disappear without sound, how they always knew exactly where we were. But I prefer to believe in human explanations, however strange, over supernatural ones. That's what makes these kinds of stories so unsettling, I offered. Not the possibility of ghosts or monsters, but the knowledge that humans alone are capable of creating experiences that strain the boundaries of what we consider possible or rational. Exactly, Connor nodded. The most disturbing part wasn't their beliefs or traditions or even their methods. It was the realization that entire realities can exist alongside our own hidden communities with their own rules and rituals, operating in parallel to the world we think we understand completely. The conversation lulled as we each contemplated this uncomfortable truth. Around us, the forest seemed to have grown quieter, as if listening to our stories, absorbing our fears and uncertainties. Well, Marcus said finally, breaking the spell, I think we've officially reached peak campfire horror for one night. Anyone else feeling like they might never sleep again? Nervous laughter rippled through our circle, releasing some of the tension that had built up during Connor's story. At least we're not staying in a remote cabin, Eliza pointed out. Just a regular campsite with other people nearby. And no weird mountain cults demanding tributes, Sasha added with a forced lightness. That we know of, Marcus quipped, earning himself a gentle shove from Eliza. I think we should call it a night, I suggested, checking my watch. It's past midnight, and we've got that hike to the waterfall planned for tomorrow. Agreement rippled through the group as we began the process of banking the fire and preparing for sleep. As Connor and Marcus dealt with the embers, Eliza pulled me aside, her expression troubled. Do you think his story was real? She asked quietly. It seemed so elaborate, so specific. I considered this. Parts of it, maybe. The core might be something that really happened, embellished over time. Or it could be entirely fictional, crafted to hit all the right notes of plausibility and doubt. That's what makes it effective, she agreed. Just believable enough to make you wonder, just fantastic enough to question. The best campfire stories always operate in that borderland, I observed, between what we know is possible and what we fear might be. As we retreated to our respective tents, I found myself unusually alert, attuned to the night sounds around our campsite, rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze, the distant call of a nocturnal bird, the soft movements of small animals in the underbrush. Ordinary sounds, I reminded myself. Normal forest activity. Yet after a night of shared stories about the darkness that can lurk beneath seemingly ordinary surfaces, even the familiar took on subtly threatening dimensions. In my tent, I lay awake longer than I would have liked, my mind replaying not just Connor's story, but all the tales we had shared around the fire, the maintenance man who invaded private spaces, the surgeon whose mistakes haunted a hospital, the vacation rental owner who watched his guests, the storage facility hiding human trafficking, the neighbor obsessed with boundaries. Each story featured ordinary places transformed into sources of unease, everyday scenarios twisted into something threatening. As sleep finally began to claim me, I realized that was the true power of the stories we had told. Not that they featured elaborate monsters or supernatural forces, but that they found the potential for horror in the mundane, in the spaces and interactions we navigate every day without a second thought. And wasn't that always the most effective kind of fear? Not the dramatic terror of imaginary creatures, but the subtle dread of discovering that the world we think we know so well contains depths and shadows we never suspected that behind any door, down any trail, in any seemingly ordinary encounter might lurk experiences that would challenge everything we believe about reality and our place within it. With that unsettling thought, I drifted into uneasy dreams, where figures watched from forest edges and tapped in patterns of 3 against the fragile walls that separated comfort from chaos, known from unknown, safety from threat. Morning arrived with merciful brightness, burning away the shadows that had seemed so ominous in the darkness. Over breakfast, our group was noticeably subdued, each of us carrying the residue of our shared stories and subsequent dreams. "Sleep well?" Connor asked, passing me a mug of coffee from the camp stove. "Not particularly," I admitted. "Your story had quite an effect." He smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mission accomplished, then." Isn't that the point of Campfire Telesto, make sure no one sleeps soundly? As we packed up our campsite, preparing for the day's hike, I found myself watching Connor covertly. Something about his manner this morning struck me as different, a subtle tension in his movements, a watchfulness that hadn't been there before. Or perhaps I was simply seeing things through the lens of the stories we'd shared, finding significance in ordinary behavior. The hike to the waterfall was beautiful, a moderate trail through dense forest that eventually opened onto a spectacular view of cascading water. We took photos, ate lunch on sun-warmed rocks, and gradually, the unease from the previous night dissipated in the face of natural beauty and daylight activities. By the time we returned to the trailhead late that afternoon, the stories had receded into the background, still present, but no longer dominating our interactions and perceptions. As we loaded our gear into our vehicles, preparing to go our separate ways, Connor approached me one last time. "Thanks for coming this weekend," he said, offering his hand. "It was good to have you along." "Thanks for organizing it," I replied, shaking his hand. "And for the story. It was memorable." Something flickered in his expression, a momentary shift I couldn't quite interpret. "Some stories need to be shared," he said enigmatically, "even if only around a campfire, where they can be dismissed as entertainment once the sun rises." Before I could respond to this curious statement, he had moved on to say goodbye to the others. I watched him, wondering about the line between fiction and reality, between stories told for effect and experiences shared under the guise of entertainment. As I drove home that evening, mountains receding in my rear-view mirror, I found myself reflecting on the power of stories, how they shape our perception of the world, how they allow us to process fears and possibilities in the safety of narrative, how they create connections between people who might otherwise remain strangers. And I wondered about Connor and his tale of mountain caretakers and ancient agreements. Had it been merely a skillfully crafted fiction designed to cap our night of scary stories with something elaborately unsettling? Or had he used the context of Campfire entertainment to share something personal history too bizarre to be believed in normal conversation, yet too significant to remain entirely untold? I would likely never know for certain. And perhaps that uncertainty was the point, the lingering doubt that keeps a story alive in the mind long after it's been told, that makes us look twice at remote cabins and isolated mountain trails, that reminds us how thin the barrier can be between the world we think we know and the countless unknowns that might exist just beyond our perception. One thing was clear. I would never again hear the sound of tapping 3 distinct knocks, pause, repeat without feeling a chill of recognition. And isn't that, after all, the measure of a truly effective story? Not that it frightens in the moment of telling, but that it follows you home, attaching itself to ordinary experiences and transforming them into moments of remembrance and unease. As night fell and the familiar skyline of the city appeared on the horizon, I turned on the radio, seeking the comforting background of music and voices. But part of my mind remained back in that circle around the dying fire, where 5 strangers had briefly connected through shared vulnerability and the timeless human ritual of storytelling in darkness, where we had each, in our own way, whispered into the dark and listened for the whispers that might come back in return.